Lord of Mysteries, I Became the Mayor of Tingen City by author Qing Jiao Shi. Chapter 71-100. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. 71A Series of Coincidences. Blackthorn Security Company. Klein, Leonard, and Fry have successfully apprehended the killer, Caspian, and are reporting back to Dunn. Caspian followed Cersei home from Connor House after he left work, near Iron Cross Street, where he brutally murdered him and then dumped his body on Howard Street, where electrical circuits were being repaired. The perpetrator has been preliminarily identified as Beander, but the pathway is still unknown. Leonard quickly reported back, presenting all the information in a well-organized manner. Okay, Leonard, go and draft the report and hand it over to the church. They should be able to identify the killer. Yes. Leonard received Dunn's instructions and quickly left the captain's office for the clerk's office. Fry, Klein, you've worked hard, go back and rest. Dunn's gray eyes swept over Klein and Fry, but he noticed that Klein seemed somewhat uneasy. Klein, is there anything else you want to say? When Dunn asked Klein, he immediately voiced his doubts. Captain, do you remember the coincidence you told me about? After I found the killer using dream divination, I subconsciously thought that Caspian was also the killer of Annie Hina. But that's impossible. When I divined Anne's whereabouts, I was interfered with by a spirituality fog and did not receive any effective revelation. If Caspian also killed Annie, then why didn't he use the fog to interfere with the divination this time, and instead was easily captured by us? There's another problem. Iron Cross Street, which isn't under the strict jurisdiction of the police department, should have been the best burial site in the West End, but Caspian chose Howard Street in the North End, where the security is the most stringent. Hearing Klein's question, Dunn fell into thought, rubbing his chin with one hand. You mean, this is also some kind of coincidence? As the captain of the Nighthawks, Dunn had already informed Klein and the others about the existence of the coincidence. He astutely grasped the crux of the Klein problem. He nodded slightly in response to Klein. Yes, you have indeed grasped the crux of the problem. Having a team member skilled in reasoning can certainly uncover many subtle issues. You did a great job, but this matter still needs to be investigated by the church. Our capabilities are limited. Actually, I used divination to discover that Leonardo was the one who killed Annie, Klein thought to himself, without answering, turned and left the door, preparing to go to the clerk's office to tell Leonard this guess and have him write it into the report. But as soon as I stepped out of the door, I saw Inspector Toll stumble in. He looked flustered and was panting heavily. His obese and bloated body made it difficult for him to breathe properly and he could hardly speak a complete sentence. Your captain, HMPH, where is he? He's in his office. Klein kindly gave directions, but seeing how anxious Toller was, he suddenly stopped and instead of heading to the clerk's office, he turned back to the captain's office. Toller pushed door aside and said haltingly. The steel plant has exploded. Someone spotted Mayor Connor there. He's disappeared. We can't find him. You must find Mayor Connor's whereabouts and locate him as soon as possible. Inspector Toll recounted the entire incident in one go, and Dunn's expression unusually showed a hint of anxiety. An explosion at a steel plant is no small matter, but it falls outside the jurisdiction of Beyonders like Blackthorn Security Company. If the factory explodes and there are Beyonders involved, the Church of the Machine God will quickly take over. However, Leonardo's disappearance was the Nighthawks' responsibility, as he was a follower of the goddess. Leonardo's name now carries considerable weight in Tingen City. His transformation over the past month has garnered him considerable support. If he were to die unexpectedly or go missing, Tingen City could very well descend into chaos in the near future. In the past, both parties would have already prepared their candidates for the new mayor. But after Leonardo narrowly escaped the assassination attempt, the re-election of the new mayor was gradually forgotten. There is no chance that a new mayor will emerge in Tingen City to take control in the short term. Standing at the doorway, Klein felt a chill run down his spine upon hearing this. But a new question arose in his mind. Why would Leonardo go to the factory for no reason? After I helped him resolve his mental pollution last time, aside from attending council meetings, this guy hasn't really left the door much, has he? Dunn immediately looked toward Klein at the doorway. Klein, you shall divine the whereabouts of Mayor Connor. Yes. Dunn quickly added. Find a quiet, secluded place to avoid being disturbed. With people in both the captain's office and the clerk's office, and the situation so critical, Klein naturally needed the help of the gray fog to obtain the most accurate divination. It's even less likely that he ran to the underground Chinese gate. Klein quickly visualized the floor plan of Blackthorn Security Company in his mind, locked onto the direction, entered the bathroom, and locked the door. 15 Howard Street, Connor House. In the study on the second floor, a mirror that was leaning against a bookcase suddenly shattered, leaving shards all over the floor. Leonardo's figure gradually emerged in the mirror. It's 008 again. After the explosion, Leonardo finally found a breakthrough in his thinking and deduced the real culprit behind it all. He clearly remembered that in the original book, there was no factory explosion in Tingen City at all. Moreover, the father of Bella, the maid hired by the Moretti family at the end of August, worked at the Union Steel plant. If the explosion occurred in the original book, how would that explain the plot? Leonardo sat back in his armchair, somewhat angrily, and slammed his fist heavily on the table. He ruined Ince Zangwill's plans, so Ince Zangwill will definitely use every coincidence to his advantage. To kill me, you'd even risk the lives of hundreds of people. Leonardo was filled with indignation and felt utterly disgusted with the villain Ince Zangwill. To advance their own careers, they resort to any means to achieve their goals, and when necessary, they are willing to sacrifice the lives of ordinary people without any regard for their own safety. How did someone like that become a bishop? In the entire Tingen City, with a population of hundreds of thousands, there are only about 30 registered Beyonders. If all Beyonders were as insane as Ince, Tingen City would face the most terrifying disaster. Leonardo felt a chill run down his spine and sincerely thanked Dunn and the other Nighthawks, as well as the official Beyonder of the church. At the same time, a crazy plan gradually formed in his mind. Imagine Ince Zangwill trying every means to kill him. If he could convince everyone that Mayor Leonardo Connor was indeed dead and buried in the cemetery, he would fade into obscurity from Ince's story. Just as the enemy launches their true plan, luring Megos to Blackthorn Security Company and orchestrating a coincidence using 008, is about to successfully seize St. Selena's ashes, jump to the sleepless pathway, and advance to sequence 4, the already deceased Leonardo Connor suddenly reappears, using the words of filth to counter Ince Zangwill and thwart his plan. Given Ince's eccentric personality, he probably wouldn't mind becoming a staunch follower of true creator, right? The more Leonardo thought about it, the more uncontrollably he curled up at the corners of his mouth. 72 Plan. However, now is not the best time. I still need to make a lot of preparations, otherwise I will be exposed sooner or later. Leonardo quickly entered a state of deep thought, and the sluggishness he had experienced after the bombing completely disappeared. He speculated that the slowed brain was not a side effect of 2081, since the side effects of mystical item usually only appear after use and not the next day. This was actually created by 008, but he mistakenly thought it was a side effect of mystical item. Leonardo's mind began to race as he recalled everyone he had contacted and considered how to refine the plan. Actually, if I wanted the identity of Leonardo Connor to disappear completely, all I had to do was keep it a secret from Drake, Gawain, and the congressman. After all, they are the people here who know me best. Only if they completely believe me will the entire Tingen City, including Ince Zangwill, truly believe me. And my death must be witnessed by these people. Well, it would be best if I died in City Hall. Leonardo quickly came up with two solutions. One is to truly embrace death and then be resurrected. One method involves using the corpse of a deceased person to impersonate oneself. When danger arises, the person is cleverly replaced without the victim's knowledge, ultimately transforming into a completely new individual. There are two methods. The first one is obviously unlikely. No, it's completely impossible. Even though Leonardo possesses the Beyonder ability 2081, which allows him to simulate other pathways, the ability to resurrect is generally found in demigods and above, that is, those above sequence 4. He currently only has sequence 8, so achieving simulation is simply a pipe dream. Even if the simulation were to succeed by sheer luck and coincidence, those resurrection abilities might not be entirely suitable for Leonardo's current situation. In 22 Beyond in the pathway, Leonardo remembers that only the seer pathway, where Klein was located, possessed the ability to revive people on the spot without any side effects after becoming sequence 2 and sequence 1. The rest will either forget their memories, become babies, or return as monsters. Therefore, without much thought, Leonardo quickly chose the second option. He began searching his mind for various Beyonder abilities that could help him complete the plan. The highest priority for the ability to change appearance is Faceless, which is sequence 6 of the seer pathway. However, Leonardo has only encountered one seer so far, Klein, who has just finished digesting the potion of sequence 9 and is still a long time away from sequence 6. Leonardo, with only a little over 800 pounds in assets, would obviously not be able to afford to purchase a mystical item with similar capabilities. Leonardo recalled the original Lord of the Mysteries book he had read before his transmigration. Although his memory was hazy, he still found a suitable role. Rosago, Master Luo. Sequence 5 of Marionettes. He is a trusted aide to Bakerland Jean Madden, the Intis Republic's ambassador to the Kingdom of Loan, and belongs to the Door Department of Intis's Intelligence Division. But how to reach him is a problem. Maybe I can use Count Hall's connections. As the most influential senator, Count Hall and Ambassador Bakerland should have some contact. If I can see Rosago use his faceless ability just once, I can learn and cram to complete the simulation. But I've only met Count Hall twice. It would be difficult to get him to agree to me without any doubt. If only I could manipulate others, like 008. Leonardo leaned back in his armchair, a new idea popping into his mind. That's right, it's not just 008 who can control others, the key is his spectator pathway. Moreover, I only need to control ordinary people, which doesn't require a very high sequence number to do. I remember there were members of the psychology alchemists in Tingen City, and even a psychiatrist from sequence 7. What was his name again? Leonardo mentally scanned the hazy plot of the original book. Hood Eugen. This helped Lenevis, who used his psychological suggestion ability to trick Megos into marriage and plant the seeds of evil god's offspring in a mentally ill person. He should be in an asylum right now, corrupted by the true creator, and turned into a real mental patient. With my current abilities, facing a sequence 7 who is completely mindless and has extremely weak direct combat capabilities is not difficult. Besides, I could have left after he used the psychological suggestion on me without killing him completely. Klein would find the clues sooner or later and take Dunn to kill him. Leonardo was visibly more relaxed after finally finding a preliminary direction. He first simulates a psychological suggestion, and then uses this ability to subtly influence Count Hall. After meeting Ambassador Bakerland, he might be able to meet Rosago, and then simulate faceless. The next step is to figure out how to replace oneself with a corpse in an instant. This problem is relatively simple. Once he successfully simulates the abilities of psychiatrist and faceless, he can find any corpse, modify it to look like himself, and then find an opportunity to replace it. Well, it's not easy for me to handle this replacement alone, I need an assistant. Drake has too little experience and only has sequence 9. He is not capable enough and is prone to making mistakes. Mr. Gawain is the sheriff of sequence 8 and has been a Beander for many years. He has relatively rich experience and is more reliable than Drake. As for seeking help from Blackthorn Security Company's Nighthawks, Leonardo was not considering it. After all, they are the key characters in Ince Zangwill's story. If contact with them leads to Ince secretly discovering his plans, all his efforts will be in vain. Once the initial plan was finalized, Leonardo immediately prepared to execute it. Don't rush to notify Gawain yet, we need to successfully simulate psychiatrist's Beander ability first. But before that, I need to make a high-profile return to the public eye and appear in Ince's story. Leonardo quickly left the door, and downstairs in the living room, Drake and Gawain were leisurely reading the newspaper on the sofa. These two are really carefree. I just experienced such a terrible explosion and they still have time to read the newspaper. However, Leonardo didn't blame the two. After all, there were no cell phones in this world, and news could only be published in newspapers. And only 20 minutes had passed since the explosion, so information didn't spread that quickly. Drake and Gawain are not police department personnel, so they are not assigned to investigate the incident. Tingen City is not in a situation where there is no one available, so it is not necessary for the mayor's attendant and combat instructors to participate in the investigation of the bombing. The two people on the sofa noticed Leonardo, their eyes slightly puzzled. They hadn't noticed when Leonardo had returned home. Upon arriving at the main door, Leonardo suddenly stopped. Should we call those two along? Forget it, they don't have my ability to protect themselves. If it weren't for my prior simulation of mirror substitution and the creation of a replaceable mirror, they might really be dead in the bombing today. Leonardo ignored their gazes, turned around, and ran back to his study on the second floor. He suddenly realized that he had forgotten something important. He only made one substitute magic mirror. I forgot to bring my substitute wand. 73 Psychiatrist. Inside Blackthorn Security Company. After finishing his divination, Klein left the washroom and returned to the captain's office. His tone was calm, without any anxiety, which eased the mood of Inspector Toll and Captain Dunn considerably. He's all right. I don't know when he got home, but, Klein paused, but was interrupted by Inspector Toll. But what? Inspector Toll was very worried about Leonardo's whereabouts. After all, the factory district has its own jurisdiction. If Mayor Connor disappears or even dies within his jurisdiction, his job will be like straw, falling down with the wind and never able to get back up. But he's gone out of the door again, heading towards East Borough. I think it's Greenhull Asylum. Good, it's good that the mayor is all right. Upon hearing this, Inspector Toll was completely relieved and sincerely thanked Dunn and the others. Thank you, you will always be the most reliable guardians in Tingen City. I'll immediately send people to the mental hospital. We can't let Mayor Connor be in danger again. After saying that, Inspector Toll turned and left. Although he had found Leonardo's whereabouts, Dunn's mindset remained largely unchanged. He was indeed a little worried when he first received the message, but after calming down, he remembered that Leonardo was a Beander and seemed to have a mystical item that could simulate the nightmare ability, so he felt relieved. After a busy day, Fry planned to go home to rest, while Klein also prepared to go to the divination club. Although he had already digested the seer potion, he hadn't yet saved enough to exchange for sequence 8. Because of the success of the Beander ingredient, Klein decided to continue playing the seer, cultivate good habits, and earn some extra money. He turned and boarded a public carriage, never once stepping into the clerk's office. Inside Greenhull Asylum. Upon seeing Leonardo appear, the doctors gathered around, and the security guards tactfully opened the iron door to allow Leonardo to enter. I need to see Dr. Dust Gudrian. Leonardo asked the security guards and the doctors who had gathered around to greet him. Mayor Connor, he's on the second floor, but he's treating a mental patient right now. That guy's not doing well. For your safety, I can call him out for you. The speaker was an elderly, bald doctor. Which patient? What's his name? Leonardo harbored a faint hope that the patient Dr. Guderian was treating at that moment was Hood Eugen. The bald doctor didn't delay and replied quickly. His name is Hood Eugen, Mayor Connor. No need to call him out, I'll just go find him myself. Do doctors here need private space during treatment? Leonardo asked again, and the bald doctor answered without hesitation. No, Mayor Connor, it's no problem if it's you. We were just worried that you would be attacked by that patient. His condition was really bad, and we all thought he was beyond saving, but Kessler insisted on treating him anyway. Leonardo made no response, walked straight to the stairs, went up to the second floor, and came to Hood Eugen's ward. Knock knock knock. Leonardo gently knocked on the door, and the pale white door of the ward opened, revealing a distinguished man wearing gold-rimmed glasses. On the hospital bed behind him lay a man wearing a hospital gown, with light yellow hair, gray-blue eyes, and a thin face. Leonardo quickly distinguished them. The former was Dr. Dust Gudrian, and the latter was Hood Eugen. Mayor Connor. Duster exclaimed in surprise. Leonardo nodded slightly and walked into the ward, his gaze fixed on Hood Eugen lying on the bed. Hood Eugen sat on the bed, leaning against the headboard, his gaze fixed on the window, as if waiting for something. Withdrawing his gaze, Leonardo turned to Dust and asked, "You must be Mr. Guderian. I've recently become very interested in spiritual theories, so I'd like to come and learn more from you. It seems I've come at an inopportune time, you're treating a patient right now. But I think getting closer to the patient might help me understand them better. Dr. Guderian, I apologize for any offense I may have caused and ask for your understanding of my willfulness." Leonardo smiled and bowed, leaving Duster stunned. He paused for a moment, then said, "Mayor Connor, please do as you wish. It is his good fortune to receive your attention." Then, Duster described all the information about Hood Eugen to Leonardo. His description was very detailed, he seemed to be able to accurately convey even the patient's movements and emotions. Finally, his description was summarized in the last sentence. In short, this patient is one of the most seriously ill people we have here. Dust's observations are so detailed, he must already be a spectator. Leonardo guessed in his heart, carefully choosing his words before speaking. Then why do you still insist on treating him? Dust was clearly stumped by Leonardo's question. He couldn't very well say it was to make contact with the alchemy of the mind, so he pondered how to answer, his eyes scanning Leonardo. I don't want to give up on him, especially since his family has paid the money. That's a perfect answer. Leonardo silently praised it in his mind, but he was even more impressed with spectators' Beander ability. I guess he figured something out by observing me. But Dr. Duster, you'd never guess. I already knew you were in contact with Hood Eugen because of psychology alchemists, Leonardo smiled to himself. He stopped talking to Duster and turned to look at Hood Eugen. After confirming that no one was watching, he reached into his pocket and, based on the shape, touched the slumber charm. Duster was momentarily at a loss when Leonardo Connor suddenly arrived, but as a spectator, he quickly regained his composure, sat down opposite Hood Eugen, and planned to perform treatment in front of the mayor. He was somewhat disappointed because with Leonardo present, he couldn't bring up the matter of the Heart Alchemy Society with Hood Eugen. Just as Duster sat down, preparing to give Hood Eugen a perfunctory answer, he heard Leonardo beside him suddenly speaking in Hermes language in a low voice, the words brief. Crimson. Leonardo silently counted to 3, recited the activation incantation, and threw the slumber charm at Dr. Dust Gudrian. Duster, who was only in sequence 9 inches spectator, was powerless against it and quickly fell into slumber. Hood Eugen, on the other hand, was not greatly affected by the spell. His eyes were only vacant for a moment before refocusing. He remained sitting on the edge of the bed, looking out the window. Seeing that Dust had suddenly fallen into a deep sleep, Hood Eugen turned his head and looked at Leonardo with a puzzled expression. His tone was completely indifferent. Who are you? Leonardo's movements were subtle. He raised his hand and placed 2081 in front of him. At the same time, he recalled the time when he had just transmigrated and was attacked by Daily Simone. The scene of spirit mediumship. Leonardo did not intend to communicate directly with Hood Eugen, because doing so would not yield any useful information when dealing with a genuine mental patient. Therefore, he plans to simulate the ability of spirit medium to communicate directly with Hood Eugen's spirit. 74 The world of the mind. Inside the room, a cold, damp breeze silently arose, causing the window curtains to flutter. The surrounding temperature plummeted, and the emerald green gemstone on 2081 turned a deep, tranquil blue. Hood Eugen's gaze once again lost focus, becoming serene. In his unusually lucid state, Leonardo felt his spirit break free from the protection of his physical body and enter a void that seemed to be deep within the universe. All around him was an extreme darkness that was boundless and silent, while the sky above him was filled with indescribable transparent shadows, which were clear and bright lights of different colors containing countless knowledge. Is this the spirit world? Leonardo guessed instinctively. The moment the idea formed in his mind, he saw a hazy world ahead, enveloped in a storm of faint light. Leonardo knew this represented Hood Eugen's spirit, his mental body, so he moved closer and entered the storm that served as the wall. In an instant, he saw countless glimmers of light pattering on him, and heard thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people whispering about something at the same time. This rambling is extremely chaotic and illogical. One moment it's praising a woman's elegance, the next it's describing the relief of using the toilet, one moment it's crying, the next it's celebrating. A frenzied mental storm ripped at Leonardo's mind, trying to assimilate him, but Leonardo remained absolutely clear-headed and rational, rapidly flying into Hood Eugen's mental world. Leonardo pierced through the storm and saw the dazed, transparent, and blurry Hood Eugen. The sequence 7 inches psychiatrist maintained his appearance from the outside, staring blankly at them. Leonardo stopped in front of him and asked in a low voice. Your Beander, what is a pathway? What capabilities does it possess? Hood Eugen answered blankly. Spectator. The surrounding light and shadows change accordingly, as if Hood Eugen's sea of the soul is openly revealed. Soon, the interlacing light and shadow condensed in the air into lines of illusory and fleeting text, describing in detail the Beander ability possessed by psychiatrist. Klein nodded in satisfaction, composed himself, and said in a persuasive tone. I'd like to see psychological suggestion. Hood Eugen answered blankly again. Good. Then, the light and shadow changed again. Inside the ward, Hood Eugen was still sitting on the edge of the bed. The difference was that Duster was not asleep on the bed, but entered from outside the door. There was a sense of unfamiliarity between the two. I am your psychiatrist, Dr. Dust Gudrian. You can tell me anything you want to say or do. Duster adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, holding a form in his hand. As soon as Hood Eugen spoke, he began writing in the notebook. The beginning part was quite tedious and boring. Hood Eugen talked on and on about the wild and imaginative things he had made up in advance. At this point, he had not yet become a real mental patient and was just like a chatterbox. Finally, the experienced Duster noticed something was wrong with Hood Eugen, so he stopped writing and looked at the patient in front of him with some helplessness. Hood Eugen, you're not mentally ill, are you? My time is precious, please don't waste it. I will find other doctors to give you a detailed examination. If you're not sick, go home early. After Duster finished speaking, he turned to leave, but then he heard Hood Eugen's voice behind him, which seemed to have a magical quality, and he stopped in his tracks. Leonardo looked at Hood Eugen and saw a bright light shining in the other's eyes. He repeated it, word by word. I am mentally ill. Hood Eugen is a real mental patient, and he is very ill. I need your treatment, Dr. Dust Gudrian. As soon as he finished speaking, Leonardo saw Duster turn around, sit at the foot of the hospital bed, and re-examine Hood Eugen, seemingly analyzing his words before finally speaking slowly. Okay, I will treat you. The light and shadow shifted rapidly again, the scene before them vanished, and Duster was still sleeping by the bedside, his eyes no longer gleaming. He sat blankly on the edge of the bed, his gaze passing over Leonardo and looking out the window. So this is psychological suggestion. It's really a bit twisted. If you fight a psychiatrist without being prepared, you'll probably lose all will to fight. No, without precautions, I'm afraid no one would directly confront psychiatrist. After a few moments of reflection, Leonardo decided to end the spirit mediumship. After all, Hood Eugen was also corrupted by the true creator, and Leonardo dared not linger, lest he be corrupted again and hear that terrible, insane babbling. So he turned and flew into a chaotic storm of thoughts, intending to leave and end spirit mediumship. Countless glimmers of light rushed towards him, and the chaotic murmurs of millions of people simultaneously filled his ears once again, simulating the feeling of rapid descent. In Leonardo's eyes, Hood Eugen was no longer transparent and blurry, but remained empty and lifeless. Having achieved his goal, Leonardo didn't rush to leave. Instead, he immediately searched his memory for the psychology books he had read when he first played the role of reader, and began to study and understand them on the spot. It wasn't until it gradually got dark that Duster woke up from his deep sleep. He clutched his throbbing head, looking at Leonardo with a mixture of confusion and surprise. What happened? I actually fell asleep. He suddenly recalled the scene before he fell asleep, and remembered that Leonardo had thrown something at him. It's you. Mayor Connor, what did you do to me? How did I suddenly fall asleep? While waiting, Leonardo also completed his study of psychology. Since psychiatrist was only sequence 7, which was similar to Leonardo's current sequence, Leonardo was quite confident about this simulation. Faced with Duster's questioning, Leonardo's eyes suddenly shone brightly. He spoke slowly and deliberately. Dr. Dust Gudrian, I have never done anything to you. You were indeed asleep, and you were sleeping very soundly, as if you were experiencing a dream. I think you are indeed too tired. Facing unpredictable mental patients every day in this line of work must be very energy-consuming, right? Doctor, I suggest you take a break. You're too tired and need to rest for a while. As Leonardo finished speaking, Duster's eyes suddenly lowered, and he stood there, seemingly deep in thought. He chuckled and said, Yes, I am really tired. It really worked. Leonardo felt a surge of joy. After saying goodbye to Duster, he left the asylum and stepped onto the streets of Crimson, which were now covered by a blindfold. Duster didn't leave immediately. He gazed at Leonardo's departing figure, then stood by the window and looked up at Crimson's moon. He murmured, Why did Mayor Connor hypnotize me? Is he also beyond? 75 Unexpected visit. Sunday morning, Divination Club. Klein had just finished interpreting Elizabeth's dream and was about to go home when he encountered Dr. Dust Gudrian, who had rushed over to meet him. Seeing the other person's somewhat anxious appearance, Klein remained vigilant, not letting his own thoughts show too much, and led him into the amethyst room. Duster sat down first, and after Klein was settled opposite him, he lowered his voice and spoke. Mayor Connor contacted me last night. He said he was recently very interested in spiritual knowledge and wanted to observe my treatment process. However, he used some kind of ability to put people into a sleep. I realized his motives at the time, but I couldn't stop him. I didn't want to reveal my identity in front of him. After I woke up, I tentatively questioned Mayor Connor, but he seemed to possess the same ability to manipulate other people's minds, which changed my doubts. I felt that this was the same ability Hood Eugen had possessed. He's also a Beander, and his motives are unclear. Duster said the last sentence with great determination. Are you reporting this to the Nighthawks? Klein restrained himself, not giving it much thought, lest Duster notice. He relaxed his tone and slowly began to speak. Don't worry, Mayor Connor means no harm. He's a really good guy. Upon hearing this, Duster was stunned and almost lost his composure. You mean, you all along knew Mayor Connor was Beander? Klein nodded, offering no further comment, and instead steered the conversation in a different direction. Have you found any leads on what I asked you to do? Leonardo, feeling slightly better after successfully simulating psychiatrist, prepared to begin the second step of his plan. Next, we will meet Ambassador Bakerland and Rossigo through the Count Hall. There's no rush, it even needs some groundwork to be laid, otherwise it would be quite abrupt and might even arouse suspicion from Bakerland and Rossigo, the two Beyonders. Rossigo is seer. If I arouse his suspicion and have him perform a divination on me, I might get some insights. Since this is not a single event, but a long-term plan, Leonardo cannot interfere with every single detail by applying spirituality fog. Leonardo, who had read the Tingen Daily, did not find any information about his disappearance or whereabouts in it. This means he has reappeared in Zhangwil's sight, and the other party will definitely use more methods to create coincidences to kill him. Therefore, Leonardo cannot be impatient and has already made plans for today's itinerary. Leonardo plans to first go to Backlund to meet with Count Hall and, during their conversation, offer him a psychological suggestion. Invite Ambassador Bakerland to his home next Saturday. The same Saturday Leonardo will be teaching Audrey about occultism. This way, everything will seem logical and Rosago won't suspect anything. With that in mind, Leonardo quickly packed his things, took his cane, attached the talisman, and prepared to head to the steam train station to buy a ticket to Backlund. Before leaving, Leonardo found a baseball cap and sunglasses, changed his clothes, disguised himself simply, and stepped out of the main door. The difference this time is that Leonardo brought Gawain along. Leonardo's original intention was not to take him to Backlund, but he was forced to do so under Gawain's strong insistence. Gawain believes that although he has retired, his identity as a cavalier is eternal. He cannot simply take Leonardo's salary every day and do nothing, and he is not there for Leonardo whenever he faces a crisis. Out of desperation and fearing that things would be delayed, Leonardo had no choice but to agree to Gawain's request. Zhangwil just made such a big fuss, so he probably won't put me in a crisis as big as the last few times. That would put him at risk of being exposed. While Leonardo was thinking, he and Gawain arrived at the steam train station and bought tickets. Almost no one in the entire station could recognize Leonardo at a glance, which gave him a lot of confidence for his future makeover. If you can't meet Rosago and can't simulate Faceless's abilities, then find someone skilled in disguise and do the simplest disguise. Leonardo thought to himself as he boarded the steam train bound for Backlund. It was afternoon when they arrived in Backlund. He didn't reveal his plans to Gawain along the way. The two spent the journey in silence, without exchanging words. Leonardo kept searching his memory for relevant knowledge about human anatomy. Unfortunately, he had very little knowledge in this area, only the most basic stuff. After hailing a horse-drawn carriage, Leonardo and Gawain arrived at Count Hall's villa estate, where they once again witnessed its simple yet luxurious decor. It's so beautiful. The aesthetic sense of building such a house is so good. No wonder it raised such a beautiful Audrey. Leonardo praised silently. He firmly believes that no matter how many times he visits, he will always be amazed by the exquisite beauty of Count Hall Manor. Having visited several times before, the servants had become familiar with Leonardo. Upon arriving in Backlund, Leonardo removed his rough disguise. The servants did not stop Leonardo, but were surprised by his sudden visit. They still led him into the villa and into the drawing room. Leonardo, my friend, what brings you here all of a sudden? I remember you wrote to me saying that this week's classes were cancelled because you had some important things to take care of. Count Hall, who was browsing the newspaper on the sofa, exclaimed in surprise. I regret the explosion at the Union Steel plant in Tingen City. Have you found the culprit? Audrey has painting and piano lessons today, so she can't come to greet you. Count Hall added that he learned of the explosion at the Union Steel plant in Tingen City from the newspaper this morning. Leonardo responded with a smile. We are still searching for the killer, and the police department has deployed its maximum manpower. Meanwhile, the Charity Foundation is also providing compensation to the families of the victimized workers. Leonardo sat down on the sofa with practiced ease, struck up a conversation with Count Hall, and introduced Gawain behind him. This is Mr. Gawain. He was a retired officer of the Knights of Ahawashire, but he is now my bodyguard. Bodyguard. That's right, the goddess is on my side. You know, I survived an assassination attempt, and I was there during yesterday's explosion, chatting with the workers. Leonardo embellished the story. Count Hall admired Leonardo's willingness to chat with the workers and said he would never do that. Seeing that Count Hall didn't try to drive him away, but instead seemed more willing to chat, Leonardo decided to subtly reveal his true purpose. Count Hall, I heard that an ambassador has arrived from the Intis Republic. 76 Explanation. Yes, there is. Count Hall answered briefly. Count Hall, I'd like to ask if there's any way to meet this ambassador. Leonardo asked tentatively, constantly observing Count Hall's reaction out of the corner of his eye. Count Hall didn't notice anything amiss, his gaze swept past the newspaper and landed on Leonardo. Then you'll have to attend some high society balls, provided they're willing to invite you, Count Hall said with a hint of teasing. Leonardo easily understood what the other person meant. Even though his reputation has improved somewhat recently, many upper-class nobles still look down on him and are unwilling to associate with him. Count Hall's willingness to approach Leonardo was not primarily due to his personal charm, but rather because of Beander. This is quite obvious, since whenever Leonardo arrives outside of class time, Count Hall always says Audrey is unavailable, and he can only get in touch with Audrey during class time. So you still don't trust me enough. Leonardo didn't intend to waste any more words. A bright light suddenly shone from his fingertips. This light is very faint and is difficult to notice unless you are paying special attention. Seeing that Count Hall was still browsing the newspaper, Leonardo slowly began to speak. Count Hall, I think you'll be hosting a party in about a week. You'll invite Ambassador Bakerland, and you'll also invite me, right? This bright radiance subtly influenced Count Hall, causing him to fall silent and into deep thought, as if recalling his journey. Count Hall chuckled. I didn't expect you to guess my plans. I am indeed holding a party next week, right here. Ambassador Bakerland is Intis's peace ambassador, and the king asked me to be in charge of receiving him. He will indeed attend my party. As for you, Leonardo Connor, as Audrey's occultism professor, you certainly deserve to attend the party. I'll send someone to deliver the invitation in the next few days. You'll definitely come as promised, right? After listening, Leonardo smiled inwardly, realizing that his psychological suggestion had been successful, and decided to leave and not stay any longer. A smile played on his lips as he bowed to Count Hall before turning and leaving. It is an honor to receive your invitation. After saying goodbye, Leonardo led the bewildered Gawain out of the villa. It wasn't until they boarded a horse-drawn carriage and headed to Backland Station that Gawain dared to ask in a low voice. His gaze carried a scrutinizing quality, making one involuntarily want to tell the truth. Mayor Connor, you just used the Beander ability on Count Hall. Why? Upon hearing this, Leonardo's smile faded, and he replied in a deep voice. Mr. Gawain, you are also a member of Tingen City, right? I assume you are also a Beander and have worked for an official organization. I'm sure you have always upheld the mission of protecting Tingen, haven't you? Gawain did not answer. He was still completely confused. He believed that protecting Tingen and using the Beander ability on Count Hall were not directly related. Leonardo then began to explain his plans in detail. As you've probably noticed, there have been more and more Beander incidents in recent months, and the entire Tingen city is becoming increasingly unsettled. He knew that Gawain might not understand coincidence, and that the characteristic of 008 was that once you knew it, it knew you and everyone around you. Therefore, Leonardo did not intend to reveal everything, but instead used a different approach. I suspect that someone is secretly targeting me. They are using Beander to fabricate various cases in the hope that I will lose my position as mayor so that they can promote their own people to take over. Therefore, I decided to stage an assassination, to make everyone think I was dead, so as to lure the big shot behind it all out. After listening, Gawain let out a slight hiss. He still asked, so you still haven't told me why you used Count Hall to meet that Ambassador Bakerland? I can't exactly tell you. I'm going to see, Master Luo, you don't even know who he is. Leonardo suppressed the twitching at the corner of his mouth and patiently explained. Mr. Gawain, for some reason, please forgive me for not being able to tell you my true purpose, but I hope you can cooperate with me. You once swore allegiance to me, and for some time to come, we will likely be in great danger, which will involve the lives of many people, including you and me. Would you be willing to help me? Leonardo smiled and looked at Gawain. Gawain nodded slightly in agreement, though he still couldn't quite understand Leonardo's real reason for doing so. Leonardo, who was standing to the side, began to have doubts when he saw Gawain agree. It's better for me to take care of things myself from now on. Tingen City. On Monday afternoon, Leonardo sat in his study, waiting for Klein to pull him into above the gray fog. Time ticked by, and before 3 o'clock, a deep red light and layers of gray mist appeared before Leonardo's eyes. When his vision cleared again, he was sitting on a bronze bench, with the fool Klein standing before him with his arms crossed. Throughout the gray fog space, Leonardo did not see Justice Audrey, nor the hanged man Alger, nor, little son, Derek. Why did Klein bring me in early? Despite his doubts, Leonardo wisely kept quiet. He knew that Klein was now the fool, and this was his home turf. He couldn't afford to be presumptuous. Moreover, if he showed insufficient respect for the fool and appeared overly familiar with him, Klein might realize that he knew the fool's true identity and kick him out of the tarot club. Leonardo lowered his head, but occasionally glanced at Klein out of the corner of his eye. Only then did he realize that the gray mist in front of Klein was constantly gathering. In just a few blinks, he could hardly see Klein's figure anymore. What's this guy up to lately? Did he predict something again? Why did he go looking for Duster? Qing obscured Leonardo's vision with a gray mist, conjured a parchment scroll before him, picked up a phantom quill made of gray mist, and wrote with delicate movements. Leonardo Connor's recent plans. Due to the obstruction of the gray fog, Leonardo, sitting in the high-backed chair symbolizing the tower, could not see Qing's change in posture. He could only see Qing still maintaining the posture of crossing his arms. Qing used a gray fog to visually obscure Leonardo. After writing it down, Qing leaned back slightly in his chair and fell asleep, entering a dream. A dreamlike, floating vision appeared before my eyes. Qing saw Leonardo go to dust and noticed the ring on his finger gleaming. The next day, he saw Leonardo run to Backland and face a count whose ring still gleamed brightly. On the third day, which is this morning, Qing saw Leonardo repeatedly asking John Maynard about his health in Parliament. The dream shattered quickly. Qing leaned forward, crossed his hands on the table, and used his spiritual senses to make the gray mist in front of him less intricate. His lips moved. Tell me your most recent prophecy. 77 The favor Alger owes. Please vote. Please continue reading. What prophecy? I haven't mentioned it recently. Could it be that Qing has noticed something? Amidst Leonardo's jumbled thoughts, he suddenly understood why Qing had pulled him into above the gray fog beforehand and then used the gray fog to block him out. He must have just performed a divination, right? By bringing me to the gray fog, can he get a more accurate divination directly? Leonardo didn't hesitate for long. He didn't want Qing to think he was thinking, so he answered. Mr. Fool. He first bowed respectfully to Qing, who was at the head of the table. I haven't received any new revelation recently. I'm trying to find a way to save those companions who died in the last prophecy, but what? Qing asked in his mind, without speaking. However, there was a little mishap, and I almost lost my life. I was caught in a huge explosion at a steel factory, but I was lucky enough to escape the crisis. I'm so happy to see you again. Upon hearing Leonardo's answer, Qing roughly understood that Leonardo was plotting how to save himself and the Nighthawk's squad. He did not intend to directly question Leonardo in the gray fog as the fool, but instead, he would ask about the plan as Qing when he returned to the real world. While Qing remained silent, Leonardo spoke up. Mr. Fool, I have obtained 2 more pages of Russell's diary. This guy has so many diaries. Qing sighed silently, then nodded to Leonardo, indicating that he could materialize the notes. At the same time, Leonardo noticed 3 figures appear beside him and opposite him. Justice Audrey, the hanged man Alger, and, little son, Derek joined the party. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Good afternoon, Mr. Tower. Good afternoon. Audrey first stood up and bowed, greeting the 3 men opposite her and the fool at the head of the table. Audrey's greeting signifies the official start of the tarot gathering. However, neither Audrey nor Alger managed to obtain the Russell's diary, and Derek, who had just become a Beander, also failed to acquire anything. Qing had no choice but to read the diary provided by Leonardo. Tarot gathering fell into a silent wait. During this time, Leonardo noticed that Audrey across from him seemed to be in a good mood, and then he remembered his request from last Monday. He traded Telepathus's potion formula with Audrey for Savon's Beyond ingredient. Seeing that Audrey was in a good mood, Leonardo guessed that she had already obtained the Beander ingredient and was waiting to deliver it to him. Leonardo had already planned this tarot gathering in advance. He plans to use the favor the hanged man Alger owes him to find a mystical item that can change appearances or directly swap the positions of people and any objects. For simulation, Leonardo was still unsure about Rosago. After all, he is the marionettist of Sequence 5, belonging to Seer. Pathway likely possesses even stronger divination abilities than Qing, so Leonardo cannot guarantee that he can directly simulate it. The faceless ability belongs to Sequence 6, which would be quite difficult for Leonardo, who is at Sequence 8, to simulate even if he actually saw it. So he decided to use the favor Alger owed him and the wind-blessed recipe from last week to prepare for both possibilities. If simulation fails, then wait for Alger to help you search again. After all, he should be in Backland right now, dealing with Kilangos. If the simulation is successful, Leonardo can then have Alger focus on finding a mystical item that can be used to escape during a feigned death. Ever since taking Gawain to Backland last time, Leonardo still felt that the whole plan was best done by himself. If there were any flaws or unreasonable parts, his fake death would be completely exposed. At that point, it will be much more difficult to counter Ince Zangwill. This means that Leonardo Connor's series of plans were specifically designed to deal with Ince Zangwill. Therefore, Ince may take even more crazy actions in order to perfectly execute the plan, obtain Saint Selena's ashes, and advance to sequence 4. For example, summoning meteors, etc. Lost in thought, the fool Klein tapped the table 3 times. The transaction process has officially begun. Justice Audrey spoke first, having maintained her spectator status during the waiting period. Mr. Tower, I have the Beander ingredient you need. I will find an opportunity tonight or tomorrow to deliver it to you through a sacrifice to Foal. Leonardo smiled and nodded, without giving much of a response. Audrey is now perfectly able to maintain her spectator status, a problem that Leonardo and Klein both face. That is, Justice Audrey noticed something was wrong and became suspicious. Leonardo withdrew his gaze and looked at the hanged man Alger beside him. Alger was also a little nervous about the sudden appearance of the spectator. Mr. Tower, is there anything you need me to do? After obtaining the wind-blessed recipe and owing Leonardo a favor, Alger was often worried that the Tower commission was too difficult for him to complete, and that he would disappoint Leonardo's expectations. So, somewhat nervously, he spoke first and asked, Mr. Tower, is there anything I can help you with? As soon as Alger finished speaking, Leonardo, who seemed to have planned it all along, spoke up. I need you to help me find a mystical item. This is what I owe you, and I am always ready to serve you. I need a mystical item that can change the appearance of myself and others, or a mystical item that can swap places with any object at any time. I only need one of these 2 things. If you can get both, I will pay you extra. After Leonardo finished speaking, he prayed in his heart that Alger would find only one item. After all, he doesn't have that much money to buy it, so it's best to do it without spending any money while still using simulation. Yeah, getting it for free is the best, even though using 2081 too much will turn me into an idiot. Leonardo thought to himself. Alger readily agreed, he had no reason to refuse. Just as he was pondering how to find it, he heard Leonardo speak again beside him, adding to the discussion. It's best to find it as soon as possible, ideally before the next gathering. Yes, I will help you find it as soon as possible. Alger agreed, while, little son, Derek remained somewhat of an outsider, watching the transaction between the 3 with a sense of bewilderment. Justice Audrey kept spectators' acting method in mind at all times, while pondering Mr. Tower's true purpose. Is there something Mr. Tower needs to do lately? But given his high position, he can't show his true face. Could he have received some kind of prophecy, and then acted upon it? Audrey's mind was racing, and she quickly conjured up a whole drama in her head. Since joining Tarot Gathering, Audrey has felt her interest in the Beander world growing stronger, and she has been coming into contact with more and more Beyonders around her. In addition to Hugh and Furs, whom he met through Viscount Greenlight, there was also Leonardo Connor, the occultism tutor his father had recently hired. Through observation, it's not hard to see that Leonardo is also a Beander, and he should be at sequence 8 or even mid-sequence, which is definitely higher than my sequence 9. Quote, but he seems very different from others. He is very knowledgeable, like an old scholar, and he speaks like a charlatan, always mumbling. I wonder what kind of expression Professor Leonardo would have if he joined Tarot Gathering. The existence of Tarot Gathering and Mr. Fool is far beyond his knowledge. Audrey chuckled to herself, nearly losing control of her spectator state. 78 Investigation. After Tarot Gathering ended, Leonardo, back in the real world, found himself with nothing to do for a while. Now he needs time to wait, to be invited to Count Hall's house for dinner, and to wait for the hanged man Alger to find him a suitable mystical item. Since there was nothing else to do, Leonardo didn't dare to leave the door carelessly, for who knows what terrifying coincidence might conjure up that could threaten his life. The only thing that bothered him was that John Maynard was still absent from the parliamentary session this morning. The last time Leonardo asked Drake to inquire, the response was that John's health was gradually recovering and he was able to attend Parliament. However, as of this morning, Leonardo still hadn't seen John present. It seems INS has temporarily turned its attention to John. Leonardo sighed silently to himself, as if he could already foresee the death of Congressman John. Even Leonardo himself, as the Beander of Sequence 8, who also possesses 2081, Substitute Wand, and various other spells, was somewhat helpless against the coincidence of 008 and INS Zangwill of Sequence 5, let alone an ordinary person like John. Leonardo firmly believed that if he hadn't read the original book, wasn't a time traveler, and hadn't known INS Zangwill's plan and how to counter it, he would have been killed by coincidence in no time without Klein's cheat-like abilities. During this rare break, Leonardo plans to continue playing the role of student of ratiocination. So he summoned his servant Drake and instructed him to go to the police department to retrieve some new unsolved case files. Recently, Tingen City has been plagued by unrest, with numerous bizarre cases occurring, many of which have been handed over to beyond official organizations such as the Nighthawks and mandated punishers for investigation. Therefore, when Leonardo is solving cases, he often avoids those that seem to involve beyonder elements and focuses only on normal cases. At the same time, a hazy gray mist reappeared in Leonardo's eyes. The beyond ingredient of savon. As Leonardo was making his guesses, he saw Klein, who was actually the fool, vaguely appear before him. He saw two pieces of the beyond ingredient emitting a faint glow in front of him. Klein, posing as the fool, remained silent. The gray mist receded rapidly like a tide, and when his vision cleared, the two beyond ingredients radiating a ghostly blue light appeared before him. One was a shrunken, wrinkled brain nucleus of a snowman, and the other was a crystalline, purple-blue book-like spirit. This is the savon potion that Leonardo prepared for Elizabeth, and also a way to prepare for the ritual when he advances to sequence 5. He planned to give the potion to Elizabeth after he had completed his fake death plan. After all, Elizabeth's lessons were still being monitored by Sika, and Leonardo could not be so bold as to give the potion to her. Once he faked his death and escaped, and the entire Tingen City believed him to be dead, Elizabeth would naturally no longer need to attend classes with him, and would no longer be under Sika's surveillance. After obtaining Savon's potion, the next thing to consider is how he and Gawain can advance to sequence 7. As for Drake, Leonardo believed he needed more time to digest the potion and wasn't in a hurry. Blackthorn Security Company, Captain's Office. Klein, who had already gone home from work, returned to Blackthorn Security Company and recounted Leonardo's meeting with Dr. Dust Gudrian. Klein understood that while Leonardo wouldn't do anything to damage Tingen City, he felt he needed to do something to help the struggling mayor. This is also a way of saving himself. Initially, Klein paid little attention to Leonardo's prophecies, but after Hurricane Admiral Kilangos secretly returned to Backland, and Mr. Hanged Man seemed to want to capture or kill him, he began to take Leonardo's prophetic abilities more seriously. If his prediction comes true, Klein is quite certain that he is the friend he is talking about who is about to die. As for the other people mentioned in the prophecy, they should correspond to members of the Nighthawks squad. Therefore, Klein could surmise that a disaster orchestrated by Byander was about to befall the seemingly peaceful Tingen City, and that many members of the Nighthawks squad would likely sacrifice themselves to protect Tingen. In this matter, Klein and Leonardo reached a tacit agreement to cooperate. However, Klein couldn't tell Dunn the matter above the gray fog can only be guided through language. What you said makes a lot of sense. Dunn sat up straight, deep in thought, and said, the frequency of Byander incidents has indeed been increasing recently. In just these 3 months, it's almost equaled the previous year. However, Mayor Connor's actions are indeed a bit strange. Klein, you know him best, find an opportunity to contact him and see what Mayor Connor's plans are. Dunn gave the order, his tone heavy, as if recalling something unpleasant. Klein nodded in agreement and turned to leave the captain's office. He discovered that since Dunn was promoted to sequence 6 and became a sole assurer, his memory problems had been gradually easing. The current Nighthawks squad members are amazed by this, and the other members of the sleepless pathway, like Dunn, are worried that they will become as forgetful as their leader after being promoted to sequence 7. Watching Klein leave, Dunn leaned back in his chair, sinking into slumber. The afternoon sun shone gently over Tingen City, and the street scene was as beautiful as ever, with people immersed in a peaceful and serene atmosphere. Leonardo was sitting in the lobby of Blackthorn Security Company at some point, with Leonard, who had the air of a poet, standing in front of him. What's wrong with Leonard? Why does he look so serious? As Leonardo was lost in thought, he suddenly looked down and saw a bulge in his chest. He was wearing an elaborate long dress, and beneath that bulge was a similarly protruding belly. He reached out in surprise and touched his face and his hair. His skin became smooth and soft, as if it had been carefully cared for many years, and his golden curly hair turned into long, straight hair that fell down. This isn't me. Am I dreaming? As Leonardo was making his guess, he looked up and saw Leonard's expression change from serious to astonished. Although he was trying his best to control himself, his pupils kept contracting and then dilating dramatically. In Leonard's eyes, the person in front of him was not Leonardo, the familiar Mayor Connor, but a young but pregnant woman who was extremely agitated. The woman grabbed a handful of her blonde hair and casually tossed it into the nearby trash can. Her mouth was split all the way to her cheekbone, revealing her gleaming white teeth and bright red gums. She raised her hand and grabbed at her own face, tearing off a long strip of flesh, stained with blood. My face is a little itchy. Leonardo heard himself speaking in a soft, female voice that wasn't his own. 79 Dream. Who I am. Why am I at Blackthorn Security Company? Leonardo also saw the piece of bright red flesh torn off in his hand. His pupils contracted, and he forced himself to calm down and think. Then, his gaze swept around and caught sight of the mirror in the corner. In the mirror, Leonardo saw strands of golden hair mixed with blood falling in clumps from his bald scalp. He saw his hands uncontrollably scratching his face, tearing off chunks of flesh. Megos. Leonardo gasped inwardly. He then suddenly realized that he was in a dream. Just a second ago, he was at his desk reviewing newly delivered files. Am I being pulled into a dream? Is it Captain Dunn? He's using nightmare to investigate me and guide my dreams, showing me the ending I least wanted to see. Leonardo gasped again. What he is experiencing now is the final ending of Tingen City in the original book. Megos the evil god's offspring event. And Dunn Smith is peeking into his own dream. He will witness his own sacrifice. Leonardo tries to guide the dream and force himself to wake up, but he feels a resistance. After Dunn advanced to Sequence 6, Nightmare's abilities were enhanced, making it more difficult for Leonardo to guide his dreams back to normal as before. Just as he was trying to break through the resistance, he saw Dunn Smith slowly walk up from underground and into the reception hall. He saw Dunn Smith holding a palm-sized square urn in one hand. The box seemed to be made of pure silver, yet it also felt like bone. It was covered with mysterious patterns, and the closer Leonardo got to it, the colder he felt, as if a chill was rapidly seeping into his blood. Then, in the deep darkness, he saw Klein Moretti running up the underground stairs, his hands wrapped with blood thief. No, no, stop. Leonardo tried to speak up to stop it, but his words turned into a piercing, chilling shriek. He didn't know if he became Megos in his dream, the corruption of the true creator would transfer to his real self. He didn't know if Dunn Smith would be recontaminated after seeing the Megos he saw mutated by the true creator's corrupting influence in his dream. Immediately afterwards, Leonardo saw his body undergoing a terrifying transformation. Panels were constantly falling off his body, and his right eyeball had long since been torn off by himself, hanging below his eye socket with blood-stained ties stuck to it. He had fleshy bulges on both shoulders, mixed with blood vessels and veins, round and plump like a child's head. He saw Dunn, whom he had blasted away, lying face down in a pool of blood. Dunn's gray eyes were bloodshot, and the veins on his arms were bulging as if they were about to burst. He saw a trickle of blood coming from both Klein and Leonard's nostrils. Dunn struggled to sit up, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. Driven by his powerful will, he pressed down on Saint Selena's urn and opened the lid. The surroundings suddenly darkened, and a deep gloom enveloped the entire reception hall, causing countless black, cold, and slippery wisps to rise in the air. Stop! Leonardo roared loudly, but to no avail, all he could utter were the maddening words of filth. Wow! A baby's cry echoed throughout the entire Blackthorn Security Company. Leonardo finds himself increasingly unable to control his body in his dreams. He fights against the insane dreams, trying his best to calm himself down and think of a solution. His gaze suddenly fell on the saint's urn. His left arm had long since turned into a slippery, sticky tentacle. He raised his tentacles and reached towards the opened urn, intending to close it again. However, he had only gained control of his body for a second when it went out of control again. Wow! 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 The baby's cries grew more intense. A sudden change is about to happen. Leonardo roared inwardly, yet he was powerless to change the situation before him. His gaze was blank as he watched Dunn Smith stand up again, swaying unsteadily. This was the first time Leonardo had ever felt that the man in front of him was so thin and weak. Dunn seemed to have lost his former imposing presence. He was covered in blood, and slowly raised his other hand, pressing it against his chest. Leonardo quickly realized what Dunn was planning to do. Dunn Smith is willing to offer his heart, sacrificing himself to allow the saint's ashes to exert their greatest power. But this is a dream. Dunn will not die in his physical body in the real world. But his spiritual body exists in dreams. Can Dunn's spirit return to reality? Countless thoughts sprouted in his mind. Under Leonardo's horrified gaze, Dunn's right hand was still pressed against his chest. His muscles bulged, and he suddenly pierced through the chest, reaching for his heart. Click! The dream shattered like a mirror. Phew, phew, phew. Leonardo jolted awake at his desk, his shirt still soaked with cold sweat. Dunn Smith somehow escaped the dream. Leonardo patted his chest, recalling the dream he had just had. Fortunately, he did not actually mutate, the baby was not actually born, Dunn did not sacrifice himself, and he did not face the pollution directly. Leonardo sat in his armchair, still shaken, his eyes glazed over. He felt no joy at surviving the ordeal, instead, a deep fear was madly engulfing him. For a moment, Leonardo felt as if he had fallen into the dark abyss, or rather, into a stagnant pool of black water, unable to struggle or escape. Leonardo sat in his armchair, trying to calm his wildly beating heart. Inside Blackthorn Security Company, Dunn Smith's clothes were soaked with cold sweat, his face contorted in pain, his eyebrows furrowed, and his features contorted. In the dream he just experienced, Dunn sensed something was wrong, but when he tried to end it, he found that he had long lost control of the dream, and even his nightmare, he could not escape it. In the dream, Dunn discovers that he has no control over his own actions. Captain, what did you dream about? Dunn lifted his eyelids and saw Klein looking anxious and worried. Klein's voice interrupted his thoughts, and Dunn's gaze suddenly returned to calm, his expression becoming as composed as ever. He had a feeling that a thread in his mind had inexplicably snapped. His mind suddenly went blank, and the pain he had just felt vanished. Captain, what did you dream about? Klein asked worriedly. Shortly after leaving Blackthorn Security Company, Klein's spiritual intuition began to alarm him, prompting him to rush back inside. There he found Captain Dunn unconscious and in great pain, slumped against the back of a chair. The air still held the scent of night-blooming jasmine. After realizing he couldn't wake Dunn, Klein used ritual magic to pray to the Evernight goddess. Dunn lowered his head, his voice as calm as ever, devoid of any emotion, and spoke indifferently. I forgot. 80 evening party. Why did Dunn pull me into the dream? And why would I dream about Megas? The evil god's offspring's arrival event. Countless questions arose in Leonardo's mind. His wildly beating heart had just calmed down when he quickly entered a state of deep thought. Could this be another one of Ince Zangwill's arrangements? Leonardo decided that he needed to execute his fake death plan as soon as possible. It must be completed within a week at the latest. Otherwise, if I'm constantly on guard against 008, I won't have the time, energy, or even the life to stop Ince. At the same time, the servant Drake ran upstairs and entered the study. Sir, the Hall family's invitation has arrived. Saturday night, Backland, Empress Borough. At the Count Hall dinner, the week's classes were cancelled, but Leonardo, as expected, received an invitation from Count Hall to attend the party. At the party, long tables were covered with white tablecloths, and invited guests arrived in an endless stream. They were all given napkins and cutlery as utensils, and their servants stood guard by their masters' sides, serving them at all times and taking food and wine from the maids. At the end of the long table, Leonardo looked out of place. He came alone to the banquet without any attendants, but Count Hall still generously provided him with a maid to serve him. Leonardo's gaze swept across the entire banquet hall. Around the long table, dozens of dukes were discussing important matters of the Kingdom of Loan. They paid no attention to Leonardo's presence, but their eyes showed some disdain when they saw that he was not wearing any expensive jewelry. Count Hall sat at the head of the long table, holding a wine glass in the air, and loudly proclaimed toasts praising the goddess, the king, and so on. The guests naturally focused their discussion on the civil service system. This was proposed by the Fool Klein at the Tarot Club, with Audrey in charge of guiding the creation of the system. Most nobles believed that this would threaten the security of their wealth and allow those of humble origins to rise to the upper class. The nobles, led by Count Hall, believed that this would greatly strengthen the kingdom's administration, and they were convinced that even if commoners passed the exams to become so-called civil servants, it would not threaten their own or their family's businesses. Leonardo ate his food and sipped his wine, showing no interest in their conversation. Since being pulled into a dream by Dunn and becoming Megos, Leonardo has returned to his monotonous life, while John Maynard has also returned to his work in Parliament as promised. Although he keeps saying that he has no problems at all, Leonardo still insists on his point of view. John Maynard estimated that he would become the first person he had ever met to die since his time travel. Leonardo also roughly figured out why Dunn had pulled him into the dream last time. Klein, as the Fool, clearly realized that he was plotting something, so he reported it to Dunn Smith, who then tried to guide him to see his thoughts through his dreams. Unfortunately, Dunn's guidance seemed to have encountered some errors, leading to the outcome Leonardo least wanted to face, the Megas. The evil god's offspring event. After stuffing the last piece of gravy steak into his mouth, Leonardo snapped out of his reverie and focused his attention on the party. His gaze swept around and finally found Ambassador Bakerland's shadow beside Count Hall. However, it seems that Rosago was not brought along, only a servant was standing beside Bakerland. Leonardo had every reason to suspect that the servant was actually Rosago in disguise using his faceless ability. But he had no way to make Rosago use his faceless ability in front of him. Leonardo rubbed the number 2081 on his knuckles, pondering a solution. He considered using his ability to influence Bakerland and his servants using the psychological suggestion, but Leonardo decided against it, given that both were mid-sequence beyonders. His own simulation can only simulate less than half of his original ability, not to mention that he is only a sequence 8. Such a head-on confrontation will only make him a target of Ambassador Bakerland. In the original book, after Klein became Sherlock Moriarty, he offended Bakerland, who then sent Rosago, a sequence 5, to assassinate him. But Klein at the time had Miss Bodyguard, Words of Filth, and Grey Mist, which enabled him to turn the tables on Rosago. Although Leonardo also has Words of Filth, he only has one, which is his trump card against Ins Zangwill, and he cannot afford to waste it now. So, with a somewhat heavy heart, Leonardo completely devoured the food in front of him. After the meal, it was time for the nobles to chat and dance. Leonardo noticed that Count Hall had been acting mysteriously all night, saying that a very important person would be making an appearance that evening. But no matter how important a person is, Leonardo only cares about how to simulate Rosago's faceless. Unfortunately, the servant beside Ambassador Bakerland was no different from any other servant. He didn't seem like Beander, but rather like an ordinary person. Could it be that Ambassador Bakerland really didn't bring Rosago to the banquet? Or does Master Rosago have other tasks? Leonardo thought with a hint of frustration, having no interest in what was to come. Previously, considering Rosago's divination abilities and fearing that Rosago might discover that he was using divination to gain insights, Leonardo did not plant the suggestion in Count Hall's mind that Bakerland should bring his capable assistant Rosago to the banquet. After all, this would make the entire dinner party suspicious. Am I really going to have to wait for Alger to find the mystical item for me? But I don't have that much money. Just 2 days ago, Alger helped Leonardo find a mystical item called Variable Curtain, that allows him to swap positions with other items at any time. According to Alger's description, this Variable Curtain comes from Apprentice. Pathways, Trickmaster, ability allows him to move prepared items under a curtain at any time, provided that preparations have been made in advance. Similarly, he can also move his position through the curtain, but the effective distance is limited and generally does not exceed 20 meters. This mystical item is acceptable to Leonardo now. He can use this Variable Curtain to transfer the disguised corpse over, and then use the curtain to transfer himself away, or use the Magic Mirror, or Substitute Wand, to transfer himself. The side effect of the Variable Curtain is that users can get lost without realizing it, and the farther they travel using the Variable Curtain, the easier it is for them to lose their way home. Such side effects are not serious for Leonardo, as he can easily change his position through other means. Moreover, he can also utilize the effect of the 2081 simulation screen, although the effect will be greatly reduced, but fortunately, it will not simulate the side effects at the same time. We are now only one step away from the fake death plan, to simulate the ability of Faceless. If he really can't see Rosago and can't simulate it, then Leonardo will have to prepare to disguise himself in advance. The lesson of almost being corrupted in the dream when Dunn pulled me into it last time is still fresh in my mind. It's already mid to late August, the plan can't be delayed any longer. As Leonardo was thinking this, he suddenly heard cheers and applause erupt throughout the hall. Look, who's here? The current Duke Negan. Leonardo's gaze followed the cheers. Pallas Negan. This is the important person Count Hall was talking about. Duke Negan's description and specific details flashed rapidly through his mind. Pallas Negan is the highest-ranking landed noble after the king, the leader of the Conservative Party, the brother of the current Prime Minister Igheid Negan, and also an arbiter. Pathway Sequence 6 inches Judge, Faith Lord of Storms. Leonardo suddenly gasped, letting out a soft hiss. Keelango secretly returned to Backland, wasn't it, to assassinate Duke Negan? I remember that among the wriggling hunger he had was Faceless. Leonardo's somewhat disappointed eyes lit up again. At the same time, the attendant behind him involuntarily took a step forward. 81 Tracking. Duke Negan's arrival brought the banquet to a climax. The guests who came were all sighing with regret. Although there were many nobles present, apart from the high-ranking members of the Kingdom Council, quite a few people still did not get to see Duke Negan. Leonardo sat to the side, his gaze shifting from Duke Negan, clearly noticing the unusual behavior of the servants behind him. Is this guy excited? After all, as a servant, he probably rarely has the chance to come into contact with such important figures, right? Leonardo, being a time traveler, had no interest in the aristocratic class, so he focused all his attention on the servants behind him. Led by Count Hall, Duke Negan and Ambassador Bakerland went to a room on the second floor, away from the crowd. At that moment, Leonardo had a vague feeling that the servant behind him seemed to want to follow. He has a problem. Leonardo's gaze darkened, and he glanced at the attendant beside him out of the corner of his eye, showing no particular interest, while outwardly remaining immersed in the laughter of the party. The servant had a round face, black hair and black eyes, and his young chin was not yet covered with a beard. While the servant's gazes remained fixed on Duke Negan, Leonardo's voice rang out. He saw Leonardo turn around at some point, handing him a $5 gold pound. "You did a great job. What's your name?" Upon hearing Leonardo's question, the attendant quickly averted his gaze, forced a smile, and replied with a hint of impatience. "Blake, sir." The servant's reply was brief and forceful. He took the gold pounds from Leonardo, and when he looked up, Duke Negan was nowhere to be seen. Only the guests, still singing, dancing, drinking, and making merry, remained. "Damn it!" The servant cursed under his breath. Just then, he saw Leonardo's expression suddenly change. He clutched his stomach in pain, gave himself an awkward smirk, turned and ran into the bathroom, locking the door behind him. Once Leonardo was out of sight, the servant's gaze suddenly turned cold, and he crushed the gold pounds banknote in his palm. Looking for death, the servant cursed under his breath again, then seemed to forget his status as a servant, and strode through the crowd to the corner of the stairs where Duke Negan had disappeared. He looked around to make sure no one was watching him, then quickly climbed the stairs and ran to the second floor. Leonardo appeared silently in the shadow of the gas lamp, taking in everything that had just happened. A gold coin rested steadily in his palm, with the king's portrait facing upwards. "This guy is actually Qilango's." He was silently surprised. After all, in the original book, Qilango's assassination would not happen until September. Just now, while handing the other person a banknote and then pretending to have a stomachache and running to the restroom, Leonardo secretly used the coin divination. The fact that the king's portrait is facing upwards means that Leonardo's guess is correct. Since he had nothing on him, he had to use a banknote as a medium for divination. Leonardo also saw the servant crushing the banknotes in his palm, which made him feel very distressed. However, Leonardo decided to take a risk. Rosago didn't come, but if he can see Faceless's abilities at Qilangos's place, he only needs to brush up on his knowledge when he gets back to successfully simulate it. Qilangos is the Wind Blessed of Sequence 6. Even with the mystical item, its strength cannot match Rosago of Sequence 5, which greatly reduces Leonardo's danger. For him now, Sequence 5 and Sequence 6 are the same, he can't beat them either. Leonardo only intended to simulate the event and observe from a distance, there was no need for direct combat. Qilango's lack of divination abilities also makes his tracking ability a weakness. Leonardo followed Blake's footsteps with small, quick steps, going up the stairs to the second floor. The Count Hall family's villa is as complex as a castle. The second floor is not an ordinary living room, but a long and narrow corridor that connects many rooms of different sizes. The corridor was only dimly lit by gas lamps. With no one around, Leonardo didn't rush in, and the number 2081 on his fingertip changed color again. Leonardo raised his right hand and wiped it across his face, instantly making his features blurry and indistinct. Immediately afterwards, he reached into a hidden pouch at his waist and pulled out a handful of shimmering, fluorescent powder, which he then sprinkled on himself in accordance with an incantation. Leonardo's figure began to disappear inch by inch, his outline as if drawn with a pencil and then completely erased by an eraser. This is the witch's ability, invisibility, which Leonardo simulated during his previous battle with Trissa. Using invisibility, Leonardo manipulated his body to move as lightly as a feather, carefully strolling through the corridor. His leather boots made no sound as they touched the ground. Finally, at the end of the corridor, he saw Blake, half of his body hidden in the shadows. The other person was leaning over, their ear pressed against the door, listening intently to the sounds coming from inside. Leonardo almost burst out laughing when he saw this. He had assumed that Qilangos would barge into the room violently and kill all the members inside. Perhaps it's because Duke Negan and Ambassador Bakerland are both beyonders of the mid-sequence that Qilangos dare not act rashly. I never expected this Vice Admiral to be so cautious. Leonardo stood at the end of the corridor, watching from a distance, not daring to get too close. He hid most of his body around the corner, only peeking out half of his head. He dared not gamble that his invisibility was truly effective, that Qilangos would be completely unaware of him. After Qilangos had been pressed against the door for a while, he suddenly turned his head toward Leonardo, who immediately pulled his head back. As expected, the invisibility I simulated still has risks, I need to move even further away. Leonardo thought to himself, but when he peeked out again, Qilangos had already disappeared. While harboring doubts, Leonardo kept a certain distance and searched for Qilangos's whereabouts in the corridor. When he finally reached the stairs, he saw Qilangos, who looked like a servant, walking down the steps and heading straight for the main door. Is he planning to abandon this assassination attempt? Leonardo thought, feeling this was a good opportunity. Once he leaves the Count Hall villa, it won't be long before Qilangos reverts to his legitimate status in Backland. Leonardo once again followed Qilangos with small, quick steps. In his invisibility state, he attracted no attention as they walked out of the great door and out of the Count Hall estate. Even at night, the bustling streets of Backland are not as deserted as Tingen City. All kinds of bars are open, and there are many scantily clad women soliciting customers on the roadside. Maintaining a safe distance, even though Leonardo was invisible, he still hid behind cover every time Qilangos turned around. The tracking went very smoothly until Leonardo followed Qilangos to a deserted corner, where the latter suddenly stopped. Leonardo quickly hid in the corner, only daring to show his eyes in his invisibility state. Then he saw Qilangos's body and face changing wildly. When he turned around again, the servant Blake's round face suddenly became thinner, his black eyes turned blue, his brown hair turned black, and he grew about 10 centimeters taller. Leonardo stood frozen in place, as if struck by lightning. He clearly remembered that Qilangos was a burly man with a distinctive wide chin and dark green eyes. But the person in front of him was clearly not Qilangos. He was very handsome and had a light beard. Leonardo's heart sank, and he quickly recognized the true identity of the person in front of him. Sequence 5 inches marionettist, Rosago. Master Luo. 82 The cane that doesn't recognize its owner. Run, run. Upon seeing Rosago's face, Leonardo had only one thought left in his mind. He's a marionettist, and he already knew about me. This is a trap. In an instant, Leonardo turned and ran, but suddenly found that his body and mind were becoming stiff and sluggish. This is the core skill of the marionettist, spirit body threads, which is also one of the most difficult abilities to deal with below the high sequence level. Leonardo had no intention of stopping or using 2081 simulation's ability at this moment. He had never studied this kind of knowledge, let alone having only sequence 8. He reached into his pocket, intending to pull out the variable curtain to escape, but was shocked to find that his arm was completely suspended in midair, and he could only move his fingers slightly. Why are you following me? Rosago's voice echoed softly behind him, followed by a muttered, a sequence 8. He had assumed that anyone daring to follow him would be a mid-sequence with a sequence of 7 or higher, not a Beander with a low sequence or even no ability to hide. He chuckled dismissively. A sequence 8 isn't even worthy of being my secret doll. After saying that, he raised his hand and pulled out a revolver to deliver a fatal blow to Leonardo. He walked around to Leonardo and pressed the black barrel of a gun against his forehead. Bang! Sparks flew from the gun needle, and the bullet flew out, but in the instant the shot was fired, Leonardo had already vanished. All that remained in that empty alley was a black walnut cane lying quietly in place. He actually got away. This guy is clearly a man, so how can he use the witch's Beander ability? Rosago didn't care. He didn't take the Beander of sequence 8 seriously at all. He could accurately track down the other party with just a little divination. So he bent down, intending to pick up the cane and use it as a medium for divination. Why didn't I run into it? Rosago exclaimed in surprise. His hand had clearly reached for the cane, but it had shifted slightly, and the cane had unknowingly moved to the left. Is it just my imagination? Rosago didn't think much of it, bent down again, and reached for his cane. The moment his fingertips touched the cane, he suddenly realized that the cane had vanished as if it had been pulled away by an invisible force. Rosago, who had initially shown no interest, suddenly brightened his somewhat dim eyes, and his spiritual thread snapped in midair, leaving only a hazy gray mist that was blown away by the wind. Interesting. It would be quite nice to turn him into a secret puppet. Rosago, his face grim, leaned against the wall and fell into a deep sleep. Phew, thank goodness this guy didn't try to kill me outright. If it weren't for the gray mist left by Klein that blocked my thoughts for a moment, preventing my thinking from completely stopping, I would still be able to think and use substitute wand. Leonardo stood in the Count Hall's courtyard, still shaken by the experience. He'll definitely use divination to track me down, but if I escape Backland, Rosago, who has a secret mission, shouldn't travel all the way to Tingen to find me, right? Lost in thought, Leonardo sat on the grass and let out a long sigh, only to be interrupted by a sweet female voice. The substitute wand lay quietly at his feet. Teacher Leonardo. Before Leonardo could react to the sound, his cane stood up on its own and hopped toward the source of the sound. Leonardo looked up and saw a young girl in a pure white dress with gold lace trim. Her long golden hair was casually tied up, flowing smoothly and glossy. Her emerald eyes reflected the slightly pale firelight, as deep as the sea and as pure as the finest gemstones. Her features and face shape created a breathtaking beauty, and her temperament was elegant and pure. This is Audrey Hall, spectator, hailed as the most dazzling jewel of Backland. Pathways Sequence 9. In Audrey's hands, Leonardo's substitute wand, just like when they first met Elizabeth, rubbed the other's palm with its curved handle, enjoying the caress. Leonardo suppressed a twitch at the corner of his mouth, looked at Audrey, and bowed. Ms. Audrey, thank you for your father's party. The atmosphere was wonderful, and thank you for your family's generosity. Audrey, who was initially puzzled as to why Leonardo appeared in the courtyard in such a disheveled state, was now completely drawn to his cane. This was the first time he had seen the mystical item, and he immediately bent down and gently stroked the cane. The cane trembled slightly when touched by Audrey's fingertips. If it weren't so useful, I'd love to throw it into the stove. What a spineless person. Leonardo thought helplessly to himself as he put one hand behind his back, fingers spread, and held it loosely in midair. Unlike before, the cane seemed to have completely forgotten that Leonardo was its master, remaining motionless. Its tail was raised towards Leonardo, while the handle at the top was tightly wrapped around Audrey's slender arm. In order to prevent Audrey from falling and incurring Count Hall's displeasure, Leonardo had no choice but to give up and put his hands back in front of him. Audrey noticed the amazing scene just now and looked at Leonardo with shining eyes. He found the cane quite magical, as if it possessed its own consciousness, and he had never seen his teacher Leonardo bring it before. Leonardo also considered the side effects of the cane, and Audrey's beauty, which was no less than that of demoness, so he always locked the cane in his study when he came to Count Hall's house to teach. This was also to save his life, to prevent being helpless in case of danger, and because Leonardo wouldn't run into Audrey outside of class time, which is why he brought her along. But who knew? What should I do if this walking stick no longer recognizes its owner? Leonardo struggled to maintain his composure, suppressing his inner shame, and asked, Miss Audrey, could you please give it back to me? Leonardo was referring to it as substitute wand. Out of aristocratic manners, Audrey instinctively expressed her apology. She opened her palm and released her cane, but the cane remained stubbornly wrapped around her forearm. Sensing the other person's helplessness, Leonardo began to consider how to get his cane back. The side effect of substitute wand is to enhance the user's charm and offset the attacks received, but Leonardo can't help but ask himself the same question. After using it so many times and enhancing its charm so many times, how can it still not compare to Audrey? It's still far from that. Just then, a large golden retriever gracefully strode across the grass and slowly approached. It was observing Leonardo with its own eyes, seemingly playing the role of spectator. Just when they were at a loss, Audrey spoke up, breaking the awkward atmosphere. Teacher Leonardo, is this cane your mystical item? Could you sell it to me? I can pay for it. Audrey pursed her lips, pondered for a few seconds, and her voice betrayed a lack of confidence. 1,500 gold pounds. 1,500 gold pounds. Please vote. Please continue reading. No, Miss Audrey, this cane is more important to me. Wait. Leonardo abruptly changed the subject, his eyes showing a hint of shock. How much? 1,500 pounds. Just as he was surprised, Audrey spoke again. If you think the price is too low, I may have to wait 2 or 3 months before buying from you again. Audrey's tone clearly betrayed her disappointment. She is still a minor and owes Viscount Greenlight a sum of money. She also recently purchased 2 beyond ingredients for Mr. Tower to offset the price of the telepathist formula. Audrey cannot come up with any more funds in the short term. No, this is much higher than I estimated. I thought this wand was only worth around 1,000 pounds. Leonardo hesitated for a moment. In fact, after acquiring 2081, Leonardo didn't have a high need for mystical items. He had already simulated mirror substitution, but he was too lazy to make a magic mirror, so he continued to rely on the substitute wand. Moreover, having witnessed the wand substitution technique firsthand, Leonardo realized that his need for the substitute wand might not be that great once he acquired more knowledge about it. On the contrary, I have a greater need for gold pounds. Leonardo, with nearly half of Sequence 8's potion digesting process complete, it's time to prepare for the search for the beyond ingredient in Sequence 7. He currently has a net worth of a little over 700 but less than 800 gold pounds, which is probably only enough to buy one main material. However, if he can reach a deal with Audrey, he won't have to worry about money for a while in the future. Audrey is interested in the substitute wand now, but in a few months, she might not still be interested. Is Leonardo hesitating? It seems my price was indeed a bit too low. Audrey enters, spectator, mode, observing Leonardo's mental state. The same goes for Susie, the golden retriever. After thinking for a long time, Leonardo finally spoke slowly. Miss Audrey, when did you become a Beander? If you weren't a Beander, you probably wouldn't need something like a mystical item. Audrey seemed to have seen through Leonardo's decision. She felt that Leonardo was about to give in, and that she just needed to hold on a little longer. She seemed to already see herself stroking the cane every day, and she was so excited and agitated that she almost lost her composure. Teacher, I'm already a Beander. Facing Audrey from the spectator pathway, Leonardo didn't feign confusion and simply nodded in response. Sell this broken cane before Audrey discovers the premium. Given the current situation, I'm unlikely to get it back anyway, so I might as well do a favor. Leonardo pondered to himself, his gaze sweeping over the substitute wand wrapped around Audrey's forearm. Okay, I agree to your deal, Leonardo said softly, then added. However, I need to tell you about her abilities and side effects. Side effects? Audrey asked in confusion. Leonardo continued nodding, explaining to Audrey. That's right, but I think its side effects won't have much of an impact on you. This cane is called the substitute wand, and it comes from a witch. It can block a fatal blow for its wielder, requires no spiritual infusion, and will not break under any attack. However, the pain and sensations felt by the wand will be synchronized with the wielder, giving it a sense of self. Seeing Audrey nod repeatedly, Leonardo continued his introduction. Its side effect is that each time Thea substitute is triggered, the total amount of attacks received is converted into an increase in the holder's charm, which will make those around them infatuated, even crazy, regardless of gender. It can save you when you are in danger, but use it carefully and do not rely on it completely. Upon hearing about the side effects of substitute wand, Audrey suddenly hesitated. Miss Audrey, you can rest assured that it doesn't enhance your charm much. As a woman with such charm as you, I believe you're already quite used to being the center of attention, Leonardo quickly began to boast. What he said was not without basis. After all, Audrey was different from himself and did not often face the threat of battle and death. In Leonardo's view, Audrey's situation was essentially like buying him a magical pet. When Audrey truly faces danger, she will likely no longer need the substitute wand. Okay, Mr. Leonardo, how should I pay you this money? Without much thought, Leonardo copied down his bank account details for Audrey. Finally, the deal was struck. Seeing that he couldn't get his substitute wand back, Leonardo bowed to Audrey again. It's a pleasure doing business with you, Ms. Audrey. Wishing you all the best on your beyond journey. Praise the goddess. Leonardo drew a full moon on his chest with less than skilled dexterity. After saying goodbye to Audrey, Leonardo's mood improved considerably as he looked forward to receiving 1,500 gold pounds. But he soon realized that he was likely being hunted by Rosago, so he hurriedly left, boarded a hired carriage, and headed to Backland Station. Leonardo's anxiety finally subsided after the steam train departed Backland and he saw the familiar Tingen City station. This trip to Backland not only fulfilled the requirement of the faceless simulation, but also earned me 1,500 gold pounds from Audrey. Despite feeling somewhat guilty, Leonardo decided that when Audrey needed to be promoted to psychiatrist, he could offer a significant discount on the formula's price. This way I won't be afraid of ghosts knocking on the door at night. I need to make more magic mirrors as backup during this period. Without the substitute wand, I should be more careful. However, soon, as long as my fake death plan succeeds, I will be able to break free from the coincidence created by 008 and completely disappear from Ince's sight. He chuckled to himself. I really want to see the expression on my face when the plan is implemented, when I suddenly come back to life. Relaxed, Leonardo got off the train, boarded a horse-drawn carriage, and headed to Howard Street to return home before reaching the highest point of Crimson Moon. Leonardo went up the stairs into the study, and was just about to make a new magic mirror when his vision was suddenly completely invaded by an endless hazy gray fog. When his vision cleared, Leonardo had already arrived above the gray fog and met the fool Klein. Not long ago, Klein noticed that a portion of the gray mist he had previously planted in Leonardo's body had inexplicably disappeared. He lowered his voice, the hazy gray fog obscuring Leonardo's vision. What were you just doing? 84 The final attack. Klein noticed that I released the gray mist. Leonardo wondered to himself, then proceeded to recount how he had been attacked by Rosago. I was attacked by a marionettist, this is sequence 5, and by my guess he should belong to the seer pathway. Leonardo quickly summarized, while the fool Klein, sitting at the head of the table, simply nodded slightly. How did this guy get attacked by Sequence 5? And the Beander incident he encountered was almost as bad as it was for me as a member of the Nighthawks. Klein didn't respond verbally, but just thought about it silently in his heart. Leonardo quickly stood up and bowed to Klein in thanks. Mr. Fool, thank you for your help. You saved my life once again. Klein didn't respond, but glanced at Leonardo almost imperceptibly. What kind of reward should we ask him for? Leonardo quickly echoed this sentiment, revealing the fool Klein's true thoughts. Mr. Fool, I will continue to collect more of Emperor Rosal the Great's diaries for you at the gathering next week. Mr. Fool, please inform Mr. Hanged Man that he does not need to search for a second mystical item for me. Besides, he has already repaid all the favors he owed me, so there's no need to worry about it. Ultimately, the meeting above the gray fog came to an end, and Leonardo returned to the real world after a blurry vision. He didn't take Klein's sudden question to heart. After all, it was inevitable that the other person would sense that he was in danger, which was not surprising. What Leonardo needs to do now is to quickly create the magic mirror to use as a stand-in, and learn about the faceless ability. Leonardo spent the entire Sunday in his study, not leaving the room except to use the bathroom and eat. It wasn't until late Sunday night that he finally succeeded in simulating Faceless's abilities. As for the corpse used as a substitute, Leonardo had already prepared it beforehand. Moonlight streamed through the window of crimson, casting dappled shadows on the tabletop. Leonardo sat in his armchair, idly fiddling with the variable curtain. This mystical item, from the outside, was just a simple square of red silk fabric, about the size of a palm, but it could be changed size at will by constantly stretching and folding. Now we just wait for Ince to give me one last attack. Late Sunday night. Iron Cross Street is a bumpy road, with countless row houses crammed together, even encroaching on the original road surface, blocking the moonlight in crimson, and making the road narrow and full of shadows. James slowly emerged from the shadows at the street corner. His gaze was cold and indifferent, fixed on the iconic clock tower of City Hall, through the countless crowds and carriages passing by on Iron Cross Street. Within a week, he had completed the absorption of the assassin potion and was able to skillfully utilize the most basic Beander abilities. He hid himself in the shadows, he transformed his body, becoming as light as a feather, his gaze able to see almost every detail within the shadows. He gazed at the clock tower of City Hall, a pure black dagger appearing in his hand at some unknown time, before disappearing back into the darkness. Monday morning, City Hall, second floor council chamber. Leonardo sat in the mayor's seat, flanked by Viscount Constance and John Maynard. John's eye sockets were getting deeper and deeper. He looked extremely tired. He was already drenched in sweat just from walking from the first floor to the second floor of City Hall. His swollen face was flushed red. This guy's health is getting worse and worse. Leonardo listened to John's incessant coughing and made guesses in his mind. However, Leonardo quickly looked away. He had 2081 on his finger, the variable curtain in the left pocket of his vest, and a bunch of talismans in the right pocket. Leonardo's wallet was in the breast pocket of his shirt behind his vest. To his great surprise, Miss Audrey had transferred $1,500 to his bank account in less than a day. He turned his gaze away from John Maynard and swept it over all the members of Parliament present. Viscount Constance, as always, wore a solemn expression. The only difference was that Geoffrey, also a member of the Conservative Party, was sitting next to Constance. He seemed a little flustered and excited, as if he had encountered something wonderful. He controlled the trembling of excitement in his body, but couldn't suppress the smile on his lips. What's this guy thinking? Geoffrey's unusual behavior piqued Leonardo's curiosity. Meanwhile, he kept playing with the gold coins in his hand, tossing them up from time to time and letting them twirl between his fingers. He silently recited in his heart, "I will be attacked today. The king's portrait is facing upwards." Leonardo's eyes immediately became alert. This morning, before leaving the door, he simulated Klein's seer divination abilities and received the revelation that it was not advisable to leave the door today. Now, after repeated coin divinations, Leonardo is completely convinced that he will be attacked today. However, he had no idea how Ince Zangwill planned to kill him today. Parliament officially began this week when the last member of Parliament arrived late and took his seat. As early as last night, James sneaked into City Hall and hid in the shadows of the conference room. As the council officially began, he slowly emerged from the shadows behind Leonardo, a black dagger in his hand, his footsteps swift and silent as he walked on the floor. No one noticed him until he was completely inside, while Leonardo remained seated, fiddling with the gold coins in his hand. James's gaze suddenly turned fierce. "Go to hell," he shouted fiercely. James's figure was completely exposed to the sunlight and gas lamps, and his voice immediately drew the attention of everyone present. But Leonardo remained with his back to him, seemingly oblivious to the danger behind him. John looked up, his eyes, which were filled with dark circles, shifting from listless to terrified. Viscount Constance also noticed James's presence and saw his dagger aimed at Leonardo's neck, causing his heart to tighten. All the members of Congress present, except for Geoffrey, who was excited about his successful scheme, gasped in shock. James concentrated all his strength into one point, unleashing astonishing power and speed. He swung the dagger in midair and plunged it heavily into Leonardo's neck. Click. James's gaze suddenly turned frenzied, a sinister smile spreading across his face. In his vision, Leonardo lay slumped on the table, lifeless, yet no blood flowed from him. Immediately afterwards, the surrounding environment shattered as if in a dream. James realized with a start that he was still hiding in the shadows, while all the members of Parliament present were slumped over their desks, fast asleep. Only Leonardo stared at him from below, his eyes cold, his left hand holding a revolver pressed firmly against James's head. Beneath Leonardo's crocodile skin boots was a rectangular silver sheet, radiating crimson's ethereal glow. Leonardo looked at James, who was hiding in the shadows, and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Bang! 85 assassination. The bullet flew out with a thud, and James's head exploded like a watermelon. Leonardo turned around. He had just used slumber charm to pull all the senators into a dream, and then simulated the nightmare ability, allowing all the senators and James to see what had just happened, even though it was a dream. He reached into his left pocket and pulled out a variable curtain. He kept unfolding the curtain, until it almost covered the entire high-backed chair. He pressed one hand on the curtain, infusing it with spirituality. Immediately, the originally collapsed curtain began to rise, outlining a human figure. This was the corpse Leonardo had prepared beforehand, and at this moment, the number 2081 between his fingers changed color again. Leonardo pulled back the curtain, reached out and wiped the slightly cool corpse's face, transforming it into his own likeness. His hand suddenly stopped on the corpse. "No, this body is too cold, it would be too easy to spot. But where am I supposed to find a warm corpse?" Leonardo was pondering when he suddenly saw James's corpse behind him. "Yeah, there's a corpse right here." Leonardo then covered the corpse he had conjured with the curtain again, and instead helped James's corpse onto the chair, transforming it into his own likeness. Then, he put away his wallet, took out the talisman, and switched his clothes with James's. After doing all this, Leonardo placed his hand on his face and gently wiped it, transforming himself into James's appearance. In his final act before leaving, Leonardo offered a psychological suggestion to all the members of Parliament. 2081 changes color again. A bright light suddenly shone in Leonardo's eyes, and he spoke ethereally to the dazed councillors who were getting up. "Mayor Connor has been assassinated." Before anyone could fully regain their senses, Leonardo draped the variable curtain over himself and vanished instantly. Viscount Constance was the first to come to her senses. "Am I asleep?" Just as I was wondering, a pungent smell of blood suddenly filled my nostrils. He rubbed his wrinkled, slightly presbyopic eyes in disbelief. He suddenly stood up, the stool legs scraping against the floor with a sharp, piercing sound. He pointed with terror at the slumped corpse resembling Leonardo lying on the table. Viscount Constance. Another member of Parliament also came to his senses, and he was the first to notice Constance, who had stood up. "Mayor Connor," Constance stammered, pointing to the body slumped on the table, "he's dead." The young congressman then followed Constance's gaze and saw Mayor Connor lying in a pool of blood. His mind exploded like a bolt from the blue. Mayor Connor has been assassinated. His voice broke the silence in the council, and all the members awoke, their noses filled with the pungent smell of blood. Councillor John, who was in the worst physical condition, was the last to wake up. He was closest to the corpse, and when he woke up, his arms were covered in blood. "Blood. It's blood." John reacted the most, his fear seemed several times greater than others. His legs buckled, and his bloated, obese body fell heavily to the floor. The council members quickly descended into chaos. Geoffrey suddenly stood up, as if he had anticipated Mayor Connor's death. He tried his best to appear terrified, but his performance was full of flaws, and his voice trembled deliberately. "Go and notify the police department immediately. Blackthorn Security Company." Klein frowned, a sense of unease settling in his heart, and worried about Leonardo and Dunn's recent strange behavior. Klein, who was about to go home after work, stood at Blackthorn Security Company standing at the doorway, gazing at the clear sky. Immediately afterward, Inspector Toll rushed in, looking flustered. His steps were very erratic and irregular, making it difficult for him to maintain his balance. He eventually tripped over the Black Mirror Security Company's door threshold and fell to the ground. Even though Klein wasn't a spectator, he could still sense the fear in Toller's eyes, despite his lack of improved observation skills. Toller curled up on the ground in pain, and Klein helped him sit up. Inspector Toll, what happened? Klein's calm tone usually calms people down, but this time it had no effect on Inspector Toll. Before he could catch his breath, Toll said haltingly. Who? Mayor Connor he, who? Toller could hardly utter a complete sentence. Klein anxiously pressed for an answer. What's wrong with him? Phew. Toller exhaled a breath of hot air, his body covered in cold sweat. He was assassinated in Parliament this morning. Klein froze on the spot, his body stiff as if petrified. Dunn had somehow walked out of the captain's office when he heard Inspector Toll's words. Dunn's eyes were filled with sadness, but he quickly recovered, as if he had become accustomed to it. He stepped forward and gently patted Klein on the shoulder. Golden Sycamore District, Elizabeth's home. Elizabeth, who was unusually sick and on leave from work, was enjoying lunch prepared by her mother when her father rushed back in a flurry. He held a newly published newspaper in his hand, the paper still warm. Father? Elizabeth asked in surprise. Generally speaking, Charles Clark, the father, rarely came home at noon, as his work usually lasted until 5:30 p.m. Elizabeth wanted to ask more questions, but noticed her father's solemn and serious expression. Margaret, who was clearing the dishes with her back to Charles, asked. Charles, didn't I bring you a lunchbox? Charles did not respond. Instead, he sat down at the table, slammed the newspaper on the table, and said in a low voice. Elizabeth, you don't need to take classes with Mayor Connor anymore. Margaret, we no longer need to hire security guards. Let's rehire female workers. Why? Elizabeth took the newspaper with a puzzled look, her fingertips suddenly stopping. Newspapers are not what they used to be. There are no diverse news stories, only reports that occupy the entire page. The headline of the report is, Mayor Leonardo Connor assassinated. Elizabeth felt a little breathless, as if the air around her had suddenly become still. She looked up at her father, and before she could speak, her father's large, warm hand stroked her cheek and gently wiped away her tears. Outside the window, the gentle rustling of the branches suddenly stopped. Elizabeth was speechless and burst into tears in her father's arms. Don't be sad, Elizabeth, Mayor Connor is a good man. She will find release in the goddess's kingdom. 15 Howard Street, Connor House. Gawain also slammed the newly published newspaper down in front of Drake. His voice was hoarse and very low, but unlike usual, it was tinged with a subtle sadness. Mayor Connor is dead. Drake was utterly shocked, and tears streamed down his face. Thick clouds drifted in silently, obscuring the warm sunlight. Connor House was shrouded in darkness as the gas lights were not turned on. Gawain and Drake stared at each other in silence. Above the gray fog, tarot gathering takes place as usual on Monday afternoons at 3 p.m. Justice Audrey greeted the members, but suddenly noticed that one person was missing from the hanged man's side. She had a question in her heart. Where is Mr. Tower? The hanged man Alger, like little son, Derek, noticed the absence of Tower, Leonardo. At the same time, doubt arose in their hearts. At this moment, the fool, the lead singer, began to speak softly. His tone was devoid of any emotion. Tower has taken leave. 86. The end of the story. A house on the outskirts of Tingen City. The garden outside the house has begun to decay and wither. Inside the room, pale fingers held a quill pen and slowly wrote on the pages of a book. It's unbelievable that Leonardo Connor knew all of Ince Zangwill's plans. Leonardo Connor decides to follow Klein Moretti to the Evil Dragon bar to sell the Beander ingredient. Meanwhile, a mandated punisher in the dock district goes out of control, and Leonardo Connor, Klein Moretti, and Old Neil decide to help bar owner Wesson deal with the out-of-control man. During the battle, Old Neil accidentally fell into a trap, and the out-of-control creatures attacked him frantically, setting their sights on Leonardo Connor as their next target. However, Leonardo Connor once again unleashed the power of Nightmare, but he was neither Nighthawk's nor Sleepless Pathway. He had taken control of the out-of-control individuals and was thus corrupted by them, teetering on the brink of losing control. What is hard to understand is that Leonardo Connor somehow managed to counteract the pollution and perfectly resolve the crisis of getting out of control. Cersei, an employee of Connor House, was accidentally murdered. She was raped and killed by the murderer Caspian, and her body was hidden in a pit on Howard Street where electrical work was being carried out. The following day, Leonardo Connor learned of Cersei's death. Before that, he had been living a cautious life, going back and forth between the Parliament and his home. But after the body was discovered, he unusually left his door and went to the crime scene. Cersei's brother James was unaware of Leonardo Connor's change. He was blinded by anger and inexplicably believed that Leonardo Connor was the murderer of his sister. He had a deep bond with his sister, a love that transcended that of siblings, and he vowed to avenge her. Nighthawks member Klein Moretti instinctively believed that Caspian was the murderer who killed Annie Hina, but he had no evidence and misled the other Nighthawks members. This was a mistake and a naive dereliction of duty. Later, Leonardo Connor felt physically and mentally exhausted and his mind was sluggish. This was the result of not leaving the door for a long time, not being exposed to the sun, and being immersed in books. He wanted to take a walk in the street to clear his mind. He went into the coastline restaurant and was eating a specialty fish when he accidentally got a fish bone stuck in his throat. This did not threaten his life, but it surprised him and made him realize the hidden danger. On his way home, he was absent-mindedly thinking about the source of the danger when he unexpectedly ended up in the factory district. Andre recognized Leonardo as Mayor Connor, whom his child had always admired, and kindly pulled him into the steel factory to invite him on a tour. Leonardo, who had already sensed the danger, did not want to go, but for some reason, he still went into the factory with Andre and came to the great door. At this moment, a worker made a fatal mistake during operation, causing the entire factory to explode. Countless workers were killed or injured, and Andre was also engulfed in the fire and died inside the factory. What's hard to understand is that Leonardo once again managed to escape a crisis. At this moment, the quill pen broke free from the control of the pale fingers and continued writing on its own. Zangwill thought Leonardo Connor would die in the steel mill explosion, but the next day, he found him still alive and well. Zangwill dared not commit another horrific incident like a factory explosion in the short term, so he decided to choose another direction to attack. He coincidentally chose James, the younger brother of the female employee Cersei. The quill pen lost its vitality, but the pale fingers were able to continue controlling it. Conservative Party member Jeffrey harbors resentment towards Leonardo Connor and his father, Franstone Connor, the previous mayor of Tingen City, believing that the father and son stole the mayoral position that should have been his. When Jeffrey had a relationship with Mrs. Sharon, he accidentally revealed his troubles, and Mrs. Sharon, who hoped to use him to get into higher society and access wealthier circles, decided to help Jeffrey assassinate Leonardo Connor. After Caspian was captured, Klein Moretti, Leonard, and Fry returned to Blackthorn Security Company to report on the mission. Klein, realizing his mistake in the existence of the coincidence, drafted a report with the permission of Captain Dunn Smith, reporting the existence of the coincidence to the church leadership. However, as Klein Moretti prepared to enter the clerk's office, the steel plant explosion case brought by Inspector Toll interrupted his thoughts, and he never stepped into the clerk's office. That night, Mrs. Sharon approached the heartbroken James and, using her ability as a sedator, persuaded James to become an assassin, in order to seek an opportunity to assassinate Mayor Leonard Connor. His pale fingers released the quill pen, skipped a few lines, and then continued writing. Klein Moretti thought Leonardo Connor was very suspicious recently, so he told Dunn Smith his observations. Dunn entered Leonardo's dream and encountered danger. In the dream, Dunn unexpectedly triggered Leonardo's deepest fear. Inexplicably, Leonardo Connor's dream revealed Zangwill's entire plan. In the dream, Zangwill transformed into Megos. This is precisely the evil god's offspring event that Zangwill planned, in order to get Dunn to bring out Saint Selena's ashes from behind Channy's gate, thus helping him advance to Sequence 4. Dunn unexpectedly lost control of his dream, and Leonardo also found that he could not escape the dream. Just as Dunn and Leonardo were about to kill each other in the dream, by sheer coincidence, Klein suddenly returned to Blackthorn Security Company and used ritual magic to help Dunn Smith escape the dream and end this terrifying experience. Ultimately, Dunn Smith was subtly corrupted while fighting Megas in his dream. Under the combined influence of Zangwill's manipulation and mental pollution, Dunn Smith forgot everything he saw in his dreams. Pale fingers regained control. At the parliamentary session on Monday morning, James sneaked in and hid in the shadows, and Leonardo Connor failed to notice the danger due to negligence. In the end, James, now an assassin, successfully assassinated Leonardo Connor. Mayor Leonardo Connor eventually died in City Hall Council meeting. Members of the House of Representatives have begun preparing for the election of the new mayor. Meanwhile, with John Maynard having less than a month to live, the competition between the Conservative Party and the new party intensified, with both sides frantically protecting their own interests. Conservative parties increase taxes and reduce funding for charitable organizations. The new party factory owners completely disregarded the provisions of the previously enacted Basic Workers' Protection Act, and the workers were ripped from their brief period of happiness. The massive explosion at the steel plant shattered countless families. Resentment in the factory district is reaching an unprecedented peak. Evil God's offspring have found a fertile ground to descend upon. Dun Smith has been recontaminated. With Leonardo Connor dead, no one could stop Ince Zangwill's plans, nor did anyone know about them. His pale fingers paused suddenly, then he intensified the strokes of his pen. Nighthawk's member Old Neil will lose control while attempting a life-altering ritual. Dun Smith will follow tradition and consume the Beander characteristic following Old Neil's uncontrolled death. Late at night, at James's house on Iron Cross Street. Leonardo, now back to his original form, sat up from the hard bed. He took 3 steps backwards and prayed devoutly. Fool who doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black, who holds the key to good fortune. He suddenly opened his eyes and murmured, I have collected the diary of Emperor Rosal the Great for you. I'm a little confused, why didn't you invite me to Above the Gray Fog and join the Tarot Club? I pray fervently that you will continue to favor me as you have before, and I beg you to allow me to continue participating in tarot gathering. I will remain faithful to my faith in you. 87 inches playing the role, James. It was already past midnight, and the streets were deserted. Crimson's moon hung in the night sky, surrounded by no stars. 2 Daffodil Street, Moretti's house. Having accepted Mayor Connor's death and determined to avenge Leonardo, Klein had already entered the dream world of slumber. Suddenly, he heard a prayer that sounded like a whisper in his sleep. Who stays up so late at night? Klein couldn't stand it any longer and jumped out of bed. The voice that was pleading with him was male. Klein wondered if it was the hanged man or little son, as he went above the gray fog. His dim eyes suddenly brightened. Leonardo. Isn't he dead? A complex mix of emotions welled up inside Klein. He was first puzzled, then somewhat excited. He saw, amidst the vast gray fog, crimson stars continuously blooming on the high-backed chair symbolizing the tower. This was the first time Klein had ever felt that the star was exceptionally dazzling. He reached out and touched the crimson star, and saw Leonardo praying devoutly in a small, enclosed room. This guy really isn't dead. Klein was somewhat relieved. He was very curious about what Leonardo was doing. Whether from Klein's perspective or the fool's perspective, Leonardo is a trustworthy person. However, at this time, Klein is the fool. So he moved his lips and spoke in a low voice, making it impossible to discern his emotions. Next time, Leonardo received a response from the fool Klein. He had no intention of hiding anything from Klein, and he believed Klein wouldn't report it, since that would be tantamount to him exposing the fact that Klein was the fool and the fool was Klein. Maintaining long-term contact with the Tarot Club is also crucial. After all, this is related to his future promotion. Leonardo lay back on the hard bed, only to realize how comfortable his previous bouncy, gold-threaded bed had been. As for James, Leonardo believes that he must have taken the potion through Mrs. Sharon, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, and thus he is now on the opposite side. Keeping him around would definitely be an uncontrollable risk. Seeing how much the newspapers publicized his death, Leonardo felt relieved and thought his fake death plan had been very successful. Next, they can act freely and without restraint to sabotage Ince Zangwill's plans. If he sets his sights on you, then just change your identity again. Haha, Ince would never guess I actually have sequence 6. Faceless ability. Leonardo chuckled to himself, when suddenly he heard a knocking sound on the door. Before he could even open the door, he saw a beautiful body being outlined inch by inch in the shadows inside the room. Mrs. Sharon. Leonardo quickly recognized the other person's identity, but he felt no fear and did not run away. After all, he was now James, not Leonardo Connor. Mrs. Sharon gave Leonard a captivating look. She spoke slowly, completely unaware that the person in front of her had already been switched. You did very well, Mrs. Sharon said softly, her voice incredibly alluring and seductive. Leonardo, in turn, pretended to be infatuated with her, trying his best to act like James. Fortunately, Mrs. Sharon had not had much contact with James and was not familiar with his behavior and habits. Seeing that Mrs. Sharon didn't recognize him, Leonardo breathed a sigh of relief, then heard Mrs. Sharon add. This is the potion formula for sequence 8 feet instigator. Take it after you have finished digesting it. Mrs. Sharon bit her moist lips, raised her eyebrows, and said seductively. This is a reward for you. After speaking, Leonardo did not consciously suppress the alluring desire within him, but he remained clear-headed at all times. If it were really James, he would probably pounce on Mrs. Sharon like a hungry wolf right now. But now Leonardo is disguised as James. If he really has a relationship with Mrs. Sharon and experiences the taste of demoness, he will probably be completely controlled by her desires. Luckily, Mrs. Sharon left the potion formula here and left. Her target now is probably John Maynard. Leonardo thought to himself, then took out the slumber charm from his pocket and infused it with only a small amount of spiritual power, allowing it to exert a calming effect and suppress the desires in Leonardo's heart. She didn't recognize my true identity. After Mrs. Sharon left, Leonardo breathed a sigh of relief, which meant he was completely out of Zhangwill's sight. Sigh, I guess I'll just have to make do here for a while. Leonardo sighed, accepting his reality. James was a law student at Hoi University, but he dropped out after his sister was murdered. I could try using this identity to see if I can join the police department and play the role of student of ratiocination. Leonardo thought for a moment and took out the variable curtain. He had left some things in the study on the second floor of his house, but he had already marked them so they could be moved at any time. He covered the table with a curtain, imbuing it with spirituality, outlining square iron boxes within it. These are the materials Leonard kept in his study for performing ritual magic, as well as the savon recipes beyond ingredient. And most importantly, there's the setting collection. Ever since Zhangwill set his sights on him, Leonardo hasn't had a chance to properly browse the setting collection, and he has no idea what new content has appeared on it. However, Leonardo wasn't in a hurry to browse. Since James's family was poor, they wouldn't leave their gaslights on for long at night. It was late at night, and if he started browsing the setting collection, it would likely arouse suspicion from the neighbors. So Leonardo plans to get a good night's sleep and relax first. This was almost the most restful sleep Leonardo had had since his transmigration. When he woke up, the sun was already high in the sky, and warm sunlight streamed through the narrow window into the damp and dark room, providing a little warmth. James lives in an apartment building. The environment isn't particularly bad. The landlady sends someone to clean the place every week, and the cost is shared by all the tenants. James's sister would also take on this kind of work every week to earn that meager reward. Leonardo, who had never experienced such hardship before, tightened his coat, pushed open the door, and headed to the shared washroom. Leonardo only did a quick wash, afraid of using too much water and arousing the landlady's suspicion. Once the water had wet his face, Leonardo looked up and saw himself in the mirror. James' family wasn't wealthy, but his sister's doting affection made his face rounder, and years of studying took a toll on his eyes, so he started wearing thick glasses. These glasses were not the kind with crystal lenses and gold frames used by the nobility, but rather the simplest kind with glass and black plastic frames. Although it was made with the simplest craftsmanship, it was something James's sister had saved up for a long time and worked multiple jobs to buy as a birthday gift. Leonardo wasn't nearsighted, so he took off his glasses and put on non-prescription glasses, otherwise, he wouldn't be able to walk in a straight line at all, and the whole world would be spinning in his eyes. After doing all this, Leonardo didn't browse the setting collection as planned, but instead turned around and left the door. He felt he needed to find a decent job and then move. He pounded his aching back, roaring inwardly. This bed is so uncomfortable. 88 I want to join the police force. Upon arriving at the police department, Leonardo had barely pushed open the door when he encountered Inspector Toll, who was practically tearing his hair out. He must be worried about my assassination attempt. After all, City Hall is under his jurisdiction, and Inspector Toll also bears a lot of responsibility for the mayor's assassination attempt. Leonardo walked straight to Inspector Toll, who was sitting on the sofa, completely puzzled. "Officer," Leonardo asked timidly, mimicking James's voice. "Huh, who are you again?" Toller clearly recognized James's face. He clearly remembered that James was the younger brother of Cersei, the female factory worker who had died not long ago, and also the young college student who had shouted on the spot that he wanted to kill Mayor Connor. However, Inspector Toll naturally did not suspect James. He believed that given James's thinness and abilities, it was impossible for him to have infiltrated City Hall and assassinated the mayor. "James," Leonardo introduced himself, then revealed his true purpose. "I want to join the police force." "Police force?" Toller looked up in confusion, his eyes scanning the room before finally shaking his head and waving his hand. "No, you're too thin, and you're not a graduate of a police academy. If you want to see the criminal who killed your sister, I'm sorry, he has already been executed. Get out of here and don't bother me." Toller looked away, impatiently trying to shoo Leonardo away. The moment he lowered his head, a bright light suddenly shone in Leonardo's eyes. He used 2081 simulation to develop the ability of psychological suggestion. I am capable of working as a police officer. I am a law student at Hoi University. Inspector Toll raised his head, his gaze softening slightly. He stopped shaking his head and nodded instead. If you want to apply for a police position, go to the door of the Ministry of Manpower. We are currently short-staffed. Leonardo bowed in thanks, turned and left Inspector Toll's side, went up to the second floor, and headed to the Human Resources Department door. Using his ability to use psychological suggestions, Leonardo quickly joined the police force and received a uniform and a badge symbolizing his police status. Go to the administration department to collect your uniform, the HR manager said, handing Leonardo a file with his identification. Although applying for a door position at the police department is usually not this easy, there is a severe shortage of manpower at the moment, and Leonardo has the ability to provide psychological suggestions, so the whole thing was handled very easily. What bothered him most was that he had visited 7 or 8 rooms in just 10 minutes. The administration department has a special door storage room. Pushing open the door, Leonardo saw a series of black and white checkered uniforms, including leather boots, hanging in the closet. The soft hats were inlaid with the emblem of 2 crossed swords surrounding a crown, and the shoulders had badges with a black and white background and a shining bronze star. He's currently a low-ranking officer, carrying out missions under the sheriff's orders, while Inspector Toll's rank belongs to his superiors. After closing the door, Klein took off his formal attire, removed his hat, and changed into the uniform. After hanging up his clothes and looking in the full-length mirror, he pushed the door open and went out. Leonardo's slender frame clearly couldn't quite fill out the uniform, but he still used Faceless's ability to make his shoulders a little more muscular and wider, so the uniform wouldn't collapse on him. When he finished dressing and came downstairs, his Inspector Toll looked him up and down. I didn't expect you to look so smart in a police uniform. Inspector Toll noticed clumps of hair at the soles of his feet. He's been driven almost insane by the ordeal since the incident yesterday. The police department commissioner has given Toller a death order to find the real killer of Mayor Connor, but no matter how hard he tries, he has no clue. Toller had no choice but to seek help from Dunn and others at Blackthorn Security Company. Just as he was about to get up, his legs gave way due to prolonged sitting and insomnia caused by anxiety, and he almost fell. Come and help me up, Toller instructed Leonardo. Leonardo looked around and then pointed to himself. Yes, it's you, James. Come help me, I'll take you somewhere. Leonardo did not refute this. After all, Toll was now in the leadership class. He quickly stepped forward and shakily helped Inspector Toll's obese body to his feet. Leonardo was still a little unaccustomed to being bossed around by Ptolemy, but as a time traveler from the 21st century, Leonardo did not have the stubborn arrogance of a nobleman. That's why he could so naturally play James, who came from the lower class. Under Toll's guidance, Leonardo helped him into a carriage parked outside the door. The carriage was decorated with the emblem of the police department, crossed swords surrounding a crown. Can you drive a carriage? Toll asked tentatively, sitting on the soft cushions inside the carriage and letting out a long breath to relax himself. Leonardo nodded. His pupils were no longer azure blue, but brownish red. Half of his face was hidden in the shadow of his soft cap, making him appear taciturn. He immediately leapt onto the carriage, sat in the driver's seat, and gripped the reins tightly. You don't like to talk. Well, that makes sense, you've just gone through such a big blow. Oh, by the way, go to Blackthorn Security Company, at 26 Zoutland Street. Perhaps due to excessive anxiety, Inspector Toll became somewhat talkative. Sigh, Mayor Connor is a good man, but I just don't understand why he's always in mortal danger. It's like someone always wants to kill him. He first survived an assassination attempt, then a massive explosion, and then died in Parliament. Can't those damn councillors just shut up? Did they know how many police officers have resigned in Tingen City in recent months, and how many have died in the line of duty? Inspector Toll sat angrily in the carriage, cursing. The cursing continued for a while until he sighed again, his tone softening slightly. But why did you become a policeman? Your sister's situation is truly regrettable. Leonardo considered how to answer. I don't want other people's sisters to end up like that. As soon as he finished speaking, he heard soft applause coming from the carriage behind him. Perfect answer. You're a lot like Mayor Connor, with a kind of inexplicable sense of responsibility. Toller praised Leonardo's answer, which made him laugh heartily. Sure enough, prolonged anxiety can lead to mental breakdowns. Leonardo thought to himself as he sat in the driver's seat. He gripped the reins tightly, gave a sharp jerk, and sped off toward Blackthorn Security Company. Leonardo naturally understood Inspector Toll's intention. He wanted to ask the Nighthawks to investigate his death, but the Nighthawks' most effective method was to rely on Klein's divination. Klein's divination naturally predicted that he would kill James and leave, and Leonardo had already proven to Klein last night that he was still alive, and he believed that Klein would help him keep it a secret. For Klein, the risk of exposing his secret was greater. Moreover, he could use his ability of psychological suggestion to make Klein feel that it was dangerous and instinctively avoid divination. The carriage sped through street after street until it arrived at Zoutland Street. After Leonardo reined in the horses and brought the carriage to a stop, Inspector Toll slowly jumped down from the carriage and entered Blackthorn Security Company alone. Before entering, he specifically gave Leonardo some instructions. "You wait here, I'll go in alone." Leonardo didn't refute, but simply looked up at the door plaque that read, Blackthorn Security Company, while pondering to himself. Speaking of which, old Neil is probably about to lose control under Ince's manipulation too. We need to find a chance to stop him. 89 is about the factory district again. Leonardo waited outside the door until Inspector Toll emerged from Blackthorn Security Company looking somewhat disappointed. Leonardo could roughly guess the answer he received. Judging from Toller's dejected appearance, Klein must not have obtained any useful clues either, and could only let the Nighthawks start the investigation, but this was very difficult, since the real killer was not without clues, but was dead. The original victim, Mayor Connor, was also transformed into the appearance of the murderer. Leonardo only looked away after Inspector Toll got back into the carriage, then sat back in the driver's seat and started driving. Inspector Toll muttered to himself. "Sigh, since even they can't do anything, Goddess, I pray I can keep my job." Toller sat on the cushions inside the carriage, one hand supporting his chin, his gaze fixed on the street, but his mind was elsewhere. At that moment, he heard Leonardo, who was driving the carriage, speak. "Sir, is this security company very powerful? Why don't you just use our police force?" Leonardo asked this question only in the hope of allaying Inspector Toll's suspicions. Inspector Toll immediately perked up and began explaining to the new officer. "Oh, they are also our inspectors, they just don't work in the police department. I don't know if you still recognize one of their team members, but they were the ones who arrested the murderer in the case of your sister last time." Leonardo appeared to nod in response, indicating that he understood. As noon approached, Leonardo and Inspector Toll returned to the police department. Toll said he really needed sleep, his body had reached its limit. He then left Leonardo and headed straight for the lounge. If Leonardo hadn't known that Inspector Toll was going to such lengths to keep his job, he would have been genuinely touched. He tied up his horse and had just returned to the police department when he was gathered up by the sheriff. The sheriff had a thick mustache and liked to twirl it when he spoke. He was tall, almost 2 meters tall, or even taller. In this day and age, such a height is almost considered that of a giant. Leonardo thought to himself, when he heard the sheriff give orders. Factory district, that damn factory district again. The last explosion was enough trouble for the police department. The sheriff, named Blake, was pacing back and forth angrily, hurling very offensive insults. "We received information that a group of criminals disguised themselves as workers, infiltrated the factory, and blew it up. Don't these guys think blowing up one isn't enough? Hey, those counselors are putting on an act now. The mayor died, and they didn't care. Now they're fighting tooth and nail to get us officers to arrest these criminals so they can boost their own influence." Blake scoffed. People are dying in the factory district every day, and only at this stage would hypocritical counselors actually stand up. Blake's gaze swept over the officers before him, finally settling on the slender James, also known as Leonardo. "I've never seen you before. Are you new here?" His gaze was sharp as a knife, and his voice was cold but very loud. Leonardo quickly responded, "Yes, sir, I'm a new officer who just joined today." Leonardo pressed his fist against his chest, a gesture of courtesy from the police department. However, his current thin frame has become the biggest joke in the entire team. Looking back at the police officers, they were all tall or had fierce faces, which was a stark contrast to Leonardo. Blake glanced at them, and the officers immediately fell silent, their bodies stiffening. He immediately looked back at Leonardo. "Have you received your service weapon yet? Let me see him." Leonardo revealed the sidearm at his waist, a brand new revolver, its paint polished to a shine, with no trace of wear on the muzzle. "Very good, this gun suits you well, rookie." His voice rose considerably. "I want to see you use this gun to pierce the heads of those criminals." As soon as he finished speaking, Blake turned and walked towards the door, letting the sunlight fall on his shoulders. "Set off." "Yes." The entire police team pressed their fists to their chests and shouted in unison. The group quickly boarded carriage after carriage and arrived at the factory district, stepping onto streets covered in mud and garbage. This is Leonardo's first visit to the factory district since the Union Steel plant explosion. The last incident was a coincidence, but this time it probably isn't, Leonardo pondered. This wasn't his first time facing criminal, nor was it his first time killing someone. He wasn't the newbie Sheriff Black described, but it was his first time facing an ordinary person-like criminal. The entire police force consists of 15 people, divided into 5 groups of 3. Leonardo was assigned to the same group as Jacob and Philip, both of whom were officers who had been present at the scene of the Cersei case and had also met James. Jacob had a perfect physique, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist, paired with a sharp, clean short haircut and piercing black eyes like an eagle. Leonardo remembered that in the previous Cersei case, Jacob had grabbed James and dragged him away. He was incredibly strong. Philip's appearance was nothing like that of a policeman. His body proportions were poor, with his upper body being significantly longer than his lower body. However, his bone structure was so exquisite that it was almost perfect. There was an unyielding melancholy between his brows and eyes. He had black curly hair, which shone in the sunlight. If I give up James' identity, I'll use faceless to create myself as a combination of these two guys, Leonardo thought to himself, and then immersed himself in the investigation. They are responsible for the dirtiest areas in the factory district. Even walking on the streets, you can still smell the stench of sweat and rotting garbage. Here, garbage is everywhere, the canals are stagnant, murky and dirty, and occasionally you can see fish belly up on the surface, showing a white patch of water. Damn, this place smells awful. I shouldn't have become a cop, Philip said, covering his nose with one hand and looking around with disgust. A rat darted across the street and accidentally bumped into his boot. Philip kicked the mouse away. I'm going to give my boots a good scrubbing tonight. Jacob walked at the very front, making no attempt to conceal himself. He always stood tall with his chest out, his hands behind his back, and his eyes swept over the curious workers and poor people on the roadside with a natural air of authority. Philip, we're on a mission, Jacob warned. Leonardo stood between the two, his gaze sweeping quickly over every corner, leaving no trace unchecked. Philip waved his hand dismissively and said, "All right, Jacob, stop acting like a drill sergeant. The new guy is right here, you should be warning him, not me." Upon hearing this, Jacob stopped in his tracks, turned around, and looked Leonardo up and down. Leonardo's attention was completely elsewhere. At a street corner not far away, Leonardo noticed a man hiding under his hood, seemingly carrying something in his arms. The man appeared flustered, glancing around frequently to make sure he wasn't being discovered. Newcomer. Jacob was about to start teaching Leonardo when he realized that the other was completely ignoring him. Leonardo leaned against the wall and peeked out, his eyes fixed on the flustered man not far away. Jacob looked embarrassed, a hint of shame and indignation flashing in his eyes. Philip keenly observed his micro-expressions, and while inwardly laughing, he openly raised the corners of his mouth. Philip seemed to be saying, "You'll have your day too." At that moment, they saw Leonardo hiding to the side, gesturing for the two of them to follow. "We think we've found a clue." 90 criminal. Despite their suspicions about the newcomer, Jacob and Philip, being seasoned officers, followed Leonardo's gaze and noticed the suspicious-looking man. The three quickly hid behind the wall, peeking out at the same time to observe discreetly. After looking around for a while, the suspicious man lowered his head, hiding his face under his hood, and followed the wave of workers into the factory. "This guy is suspicious," Philip concluded. Jacob nodded in response, but Leonardo's gaze drifted toward the path to the side. Not long ago, he had seen a map of Tingen City and, relying on his improved memory, memorized the city's intricate road system. They had just walked on the main street of the factory district, which is also the only main street. Because the factories in the factory district vary in size, countless alleyways have sprung up. These alleyways are usually dirtier, poorly managed and cleaned, and few people, except for workers, are willing to set foot in them. "Follow me, I know a path." Leonardo lowered his voice and quickly disappeared into the alley. Seeing the filthy state of the alley, Philip was the first to refuse to go in. "This guy is really reckless. We're police officers, why don't we just go in and arrest him?" Jacob glared at him. "If anything happens to the newcomers, we will also be held responsible." After saying that, Jacob followed Leonardo, while Philip reluctantly picked up his feet, looking with disdain at his shiny boots getting muddy, feeling quite distressed. When they caught up with Leonardo, they found him waving at them from beneath the massive stone wall of the factory. They then discovered that behind Leonardo was a heavy iron door, the bolt of which was tightly locked with a chain. "This is the factory that suspicious guy sneaked into. I didn't expect there to be a back door. But how do we get in?" Philip caught up with the two and stood in front of the iron door, asking in confusion. The iron chain was very thick, made up of one iron ring after another, and the copper lock on top was almost the size of a palm. With just the strength of the three of them, it would be impossible for them to break this chain. Hearing this, Jacob also squatted down and reached out to play with the chain. Neither of them noticed that the ring on Leonardo's finger had changed color at some point. This is an abandoned factory building behind the factory. No one usually comes here, but it is connected to the inside of the factory. Look here. Leonardo walked to the side and reached out to touch the wall made of stone bricks. To Jacob and Philip's astonishment, Leonardo simply pushed hard, and the wall collapsed around the center of Leonardo's palm, revealing a gap large enough for an adult to bend down and pass through. You can do that. Philip was surprised, and he and Jacob exchanged bewildered glances. Leonardo has just simulated Hunter's observational abilities, which allows him to understand which part of the wall is more likely to collapse. Leonardo squeezed right into the gap, turning back to ask the two senior officers. This should be reimbursable, right? Jacob nodded in response. If they could really follow the mysterious man and find the criminal gang behind him, such a small gap in the wall wouldn't be a big problem. The three of them crawled into the abandoned factory building behind the factory in order. Stepping over the scattered robots and steel parts, Leonardo struggled to maintain his balance and finally managed to enter the factory. As soon as I stepped onto the somewhat flat ground, the air was filled with the pungent smell of rust. The temperature inside the factory was extremely high, and the giant furnace was burning with raging flames. Philip continued to complain shortly after they left. My God, this place is like hell. He covered his nose with one hand and struggled to fan his ear with the other. He had only been inside for a short time, but his police uniform was already somewhat soaked. The workers seemed oblivious to the sudden arrival of the three men, remaining focused on their work. Since the assassination of Mayor Connor, factory owners seem to have ignored the Basic Workers Protection Act and have resumed their old ways of exploitation. Therefore, the exhausted workers had no time to turn around and observe, and even if they saw the police uniforms on the three men, they would not come to ask any questions. After walking around the factory for a while, Leonardo finally spotted the suspicious hooded man he had seen earlier. The suspicious man seemed to notice the three of them, so he turned around and ran towards the factory's main door. He's trying to get away. Jacob exclaimed, chase him. Philip quickly drew his sidearm from his waist, but Jacob forcefully pressed it down. These are all workers. What if you hurt them? Philip had no choice but to put away his sidearm and follow Leonardo in pursuit. During the chase, Jacob and Philip felt that Leonardo's physical abilities were simply extraordinary. They had trained for many years and had a wealth of mission experience, yet they were now being left far behind by the seemingly thin and weak Leonardo. How come this newcomer runs so fast? To their astonishment, Leonardo had already chased the suspicious man out of the factory's main door. The intense sunlight was blinding, making it impossible for them to see where they were going. When their vision cleared, Jacob and Philip saw that Leonardo was right across the street, and in front of him, the suspicious man had opened his hooded jacket, revealing a row of detonators in his arms. The suspicious man grabbed a passing child with one hand and held a fuse high in the other, ready to detonate at any moment. Leonardo stood in front of the suspicious man, raised his sidearm, but couldn't find a suitable angle to fire. Jacob and Philip also realized the seriousness of the situation, and the experienced Jacob stepped forward to persuade the suspicious man. Hey friend, let go of that child, I'll be your hostage. Jacob's strategy was straightforward. He didn't try to get the criminal to release the hostage or regain his senses, as that was clearly impossible. Therefore, he offered to be a hostage so that he could get close and use his best close-quarters combat skills to capture the criminal. However, criminals are clearly not so easily fooled. Get away from me, everyone. He shouted, pulled the fuse out a bit, and raised his hand even higher. The child he was holding hostage cried out in fear, attracting the attention of countless passers-by. Even the factory workers turned their heads to look through the door at the outside. Their attention wasn't diverted much, they quickly looked back and continued with their work. Criminal's emotions were becoming increasingly agitated, and the child's cries were almost driving him to the brink of madness. Jacob and Philip raised their pistols and approached step by step, the tension palpable. At that moment, a bright light suddenly appeared in Leonardo's eyes. He shouted, "Let go of that child." 91 Investigating the real culprit. Criminal suddenly hesitated, and then his body moved out of control to release the kidnapped child. Philip looked at Leonardo in surprise. He didn't understand why his and Jacob's persuasion had been ineffective, while the newcomer's words had worked. Could it be that this guy has just regained his senses? As Philip wondered, he saw Jacob quickly step forward, grab criminal's arm, and firmly control him. Jacob's gaze quickly shifted to Philip. You help him remove these detonators. And you, the new guy, go take this child home. Leonardo did not resist and intended to comply. When he got closer to the child, he realized that the two were somewhat familiar. The child was pale, with messy black hair, wearing a tattered linen shirt and blue-gray trousers typical of the working class. His eyes were unfocused yet revealed a kind of madness. Leonardo quickly recalled where he had seen the other person before. He had met Klein at the Evil Dragon Bar when he accompanied Klein to sell the Beast Tamer recipe. Admissal. A natural half-sequence 9 inches monster. How did he get here? Leonardo thought to himself that he had once again doubted the existence of a mere coincidence, but that was impossible, since in Zhangwil's eyes, he was already a dead man. Without further thought, Leonardo pulled up a horse-drawn carriage and prepared to take Admissal to Evil Dragon Bar. Evil Dragon Bar is located in the Dock District, which is practically halfway across Tingen City from the Factory District. Leonardo couldn't understand why they would come to the Factory District. The horse-drawn carriage traversed most of the city. Leonardo, dressed in a police uniform, sat in the carriage, looking at Admissal in front of him. The other person didn't look at him with the same fear as they did at Klein, in fact, they seemed calmer. The two remained silent until the afternoon, when Leonardo and Admissal finally arrived at Evil Dragon Bar. After handing him over to Wesson, Leonardo decided to leave. It was already past closing time, and Jacob and Philip would report the details of the mission to him. Leonardo did not need to return to the police department at this point. However, he has two things to do today. The first thing to do was to secretly give Elizabeth the Savon potion and remind her of the existence of the acting method to help her advance in rank. However, in the Savon stage of Sequence 9, Elizabeth only needs to attend classes diligently to quickly digest the material and advance to the next level. The second thing was to figure out how to stop old Neil from losing control. Leonardo had studied the life transmutation ritual at the setting collection, but there was a clear warning that the success rate of the life transmutation ritual was extremely low, and the chance of the practitioner losing control was extremely high. This is clearly an evil spell, Leonardo thought. He couldn't help old Neil resurrect his wife, but he could consider using psychological suggestions to get old Neil to temporarily give up on this idea. Having gathered his thoughts, Leonardo hailed a horse-drawn carriage and headed straight for Elizabeth's home address. He didn't need to go home to get the potion, he could simply use the variable curtain to transfer it over. Leonardo thought for a moment, then covered the variable curtain on the cushion beside him. When he pulled the curtain open, a metal bottle containing a potion appeared in his hand. I have to say, having a variable curtain is so much more convenient. Once the carriage came to a stop, Leonardo alighted and knocked on Elizabeth's main door. Mrs. Margaret was driving the door. Nearly a month of hard work had left Mrs. Margaret's skin somewhat rough, and her cheeks less round than before. However, perhaps because she had rehired a maid, Mrs. Margaret's face was visibly beaming with a smile. Seeing the young police officer in front of her, Mrs. Margaret asked, "Officer, is there anything I can help you with?" Her tone was noticeably nervous. Although her father worked at City Hall, as a housewife, she rarely had direct contact with public officials like the police. "Hello, madam." Leonardo bowed politely and began with the excuse he had prepared beforehand. "We are currently investigating Mayor Connor's death. The investigation shows that your daughter, Elizabeth, frequently visited Mayor Connor on Sunday afternoons." Mrs. Margaret became even more nervous, and she blurted out, with a questioning tone, "How could our Elizabeth be a murderer?" Leonardo first calmed Mrs. Margaret down. "Madam, please don't worry. We believe Elizabeth couldn't be the murderer, we're just doing our basic research. We must bring this murderer to justice, mustn't we? Otherwise, if there is a killer who can bypass the layers of security at City Hall and directly assassinate the mayor, I think the entire city of Tingen will be living in fear." Leonardo's question clearly softened Mrs. Margaret's attitude considerably. She stepped aside and pointed to the room on the second floor, saying, "Elizabeth is in her room. Alas, ever since Mayor Connor's assassination, she's been like a lost soul, locking herself in her room and no longer wanting to go to school. I didn't expect I was so important to Elizabeth." Leonardo felt a lot warmer inside, but he still maintained his serious police officer demeanor. Following behind Mrs. Margaret, Leonardo arrived at the door of Elizabeth's room. Margaret gently knocked on the door and asked softly, "Elizabeth, a police officer would like to inquire about Mayor Connor. May we come in?" Her voice was like a pebble thrown into the ocean, receiving no response. Mrs. Margaret visibly grew anxious, but instead of scolding her daughter, she spoke in a softer voice. "Elizabeth, stop being so willful, my lovely daughter. If you provide the crucial clues, the officer might be able to catch the real culprit and avenge Mayor Connor. Upon hearing revenge, the locked door was finally unlocked. Elizabeth was wearing pajamas, her brown hair was messy, her eyes were red-rimmed, and there were obvious tear stains on her fair cheeks. Elizabeth raised her head, her dim gaze fixed on Leonardo, who was dressed in a police uniform. "What would you like to know?" Her voice was low and dejected, revealing a deep sadness. "Am I that important to Elizabeth?" Leonardo asked again, this time not with emotion, but with doubt. Because he felt he had never taught Elizabeth any real occultism, and with Sika watching over them at the time, Leonardo naturally couldn't say much. "Elizabeth, may I come in and talk?" Leonardo asked aloud. 92 inches Savon, Elizabeth. After receiving Mrs. Margaret's permission, Leonardo and Elizabeth entered the room, closed the door, and spoke privately. He acted as if he were a real police officer and questioned Elizabeth briefly. Of course, Elizabeth already knew the answers too. Although Leonardo felt a little guilty seeing Elizabeth so heartbroken for him, he didn't rashly reveal himself, since his real goal was to thwart Ins Zangwill's plan at the last minute. If he exposes himself to one person, he will expose himself to the next. If this continues, Leonardo may find that his fake death will actually be exposed. Therefore, Leonardo only briefly inquired about it and did not reveal anything suspicious. Only at the very end did Leonardo pull out a metal bottle containing the potion from behind his back. "Elizabeth," he said, his expression turning solemn, "this is Mayor Connor's keepsake. When we found it, we discovered it was a gift for you." Elizabeth took the metal bottle and looked curiously at the liquid inside. The liquid inside was neither particularly cloudy nor clear. Elizabeth discovered that even when she tilted the metal bottle, the liquid remained as if it were stuck together, and not a single drop spilled. "Elizabeth, I hope you will keep this a secret." He adopted Mayor Connor's tone, his eyes gleaming brightly. Using a psychological suggestion, Elizabeth is made to instinctively keep the secret of this potion. As for taking it, Leonardo doesn't intend to watch her take it now. With his multiple Beander abilities, he has a better solution. He could easily pull Elizabeth into a dream and tell her what the potion was. After delivering the psychological suggestion, Leonardo put on his soft cap and prepared to leave and return home. After saying goodbye to Mrs. Margaret and thanking her again, Leonardo got into the carriage and returned to Iron Cross Street, stepping into the cheap apartment. Sitting on the hard bed in the room, Leonardo's fingertips gleamed with a dark luster as he lay back and drifted into a dream. Elizabeth sat in her room, examining the potion with some curiosity. Immediately afterwards, he saw that familiar blonde, blue-eyed figure push open his door and enter the room. "Teacher," Elizabeth exclaimed with a mixture of surprise and delight, her dull eyes regaining their brightness. She wanted to rush up and hug her occultism teacher, but years of upbringing kept her in check. Elizabeth suddenly realized that she hadn't washed up or put on any nice clothes, and was only wearing her pajamas. She immediately lowered her head, her cheeks flushing red with embarrassment. Leonardo Connor didn't care about any of that. His voice remained as calming as ever. "Elizabeth, you must help me keep this a secret. You must not tell anyone what you are seeing or doing right now." Leonardo placed a finger in front of his lips. Elizabeth nodded emphatically, then picked up the metal bottle in her hand. "Teacher, a police officer came to see me this afternoon. He said this is a keepsake you left me, a gift." Leonardo flashed his usual smile. "Yes, it's a potion." "Potion." Elizabeth's eyes shone even brighter. She felt incredibly excited, as if the gloom from before had been completely dispelled by Leonardo Connor's reappearance. She quickly recalled the potions Leonardo had mentioned in his previous lectures, and remembered the substitute wand she had first seen in his study. This is the Sequence 9 potion of the Savon pathway, named after its pathway. It can awaken memories and help you recall all the knowledge you've ever had. You'll become more proficient in things like aqua regia, nitroglycerin, and complex gear mechanisms. You'll seem to know everything. You will be qualified to learn and master occultism and ritual magic. Leonardo explained patiently. Savon. Elizabeth became increasingly interested in the potion in her hand. In fact, she had long wanted to become a Beander, but since she didn't know how, she hoped to become Leonardo's student. Over time, Elizabeth's view of Leonardo changed, and she became more and more of an admirer of him. Elizabeth's gaze then returned to Leonardo, her eyes burning as if she wanted to memorize his face completely. "Teacher, they all say you are dead." Elizabeth suddenly began to sob, her fair hands gripping the hem of her dress tightly. Seeing this, Leonardo did not go forward, but stood at the doorway of the room, the light from outside stretching his shadow long. "I just have more important things to do," Leonardo continued. "You can drink this potion now." Elizabeth nodded emphatically, then picked up the metal bottle and drank the potion inside. She immediately felt a sharp, throbbing pain in her head as countless pieces of knowledge she had never learned or seen before flooded into her mind, invading her memory. It hurt so much, Elizabeth clutched her head in pain as Leonardo's voice rang in her ears again. Imagine an object in your mind, something common, simple, and easy. Elizabeth quickly did as she was told, imagining her usual fountain pen. Put all your attention on it, repeat it over and over, keep sketching it, does it feel better? Leonardo's voice pierced through, like a soul-soothing song. Elizabeth did not respond, but simply nodded slightly, her tightly furrowed brows gradually relaxing. Until Elizabeth reopened her eyes, until her brown pupils gradually turned black. Elizabeth noticed the unusual appearance of her glasses through the vanity mirror and panicked, looking at Leonardo helplessly. Leonardo still had that smile on his face. This is an outward manifestation of the potion's power. Once you learn meditation and know how to control it, your eyes will return to normal. He then explained the specific methods of meditation to Elizabeth. Leonardo only achieved his goal after Elizabeth had fully digested Leonardo's teachings on meditation and memorized his warnings and tips. His body suddenly dispersed like the moon reflected in a lake. Remember to go back to school. It's a must, and it's the first task I'm giving you. Leonardo's voice echoed in Elizabeth's mind. Click. The dream shattered like a mirror. The gentle afternoon sunlight fell on the table. Elizabeth slowly raised her head from the desk, then suddenly turned around and looked towards the door. The door remained locked, showing no signs of opening. The room was empty, and there was no sign of the familiar blonde-haired, blue-eyed teacher. Elizabeth still clutched the metal vial in her hand. The potion inside didn't flow with her large movements, remaining solid as if it were solid. A sense of loss washed over Elizabeth again, shattering the relaxation she had felt from basking in the sun. She gripped the metal bottle tightly in her hand, recalling the dream she had just had. Finally, Elizabeth raised her head and drank the potion in one gulp. Following Leonardo's instructions in her dream, Elizabeth quickly visualized the pen. Once the stinging sensation subsided, she ran out of the door and found her mother. Mrs. Margaret. Elizabeth's pupils were originally brown, and even though they were now stained black by the potion, it was still difficult to detect. When Mrs. Margaret saw her daughter run out, she reached out and hugged her. You must be hungry, right? I'll tell the maid to praise the goddess, she has pulled you out of the gloom, you haven't eaten for a day and a night. Elizabeth didn't answer, recalling the task Leonardo gave her at the end of the dream. She raised her head, and a sweet smile, just like before, appeared on her round face. Mother, I'm going back to school tomorrow. 93 hints. Connor House. With a heavy heart, Drake, who was busy sorting through Leonardo Connor's belongings, suddenly stopped. When he turned around, he was shocked to find that the deceased Leonardo Connor was standing behind him. Leonardo Connor calmly watched Drake as he busied himself tidying up. Gentlemen. Drake's eyes were filled with surprise. Then he saw Leonardo's figure disperse like the moon reflected in a lake, and the surrounding environment shatter like a mirror. Only Leonardo's voice echoed in my mind. Remember to keep hunting animals. I will come back when you advance to sequence 8. Quote. As the dream ended, Drake slowly opened his eyes on the floor of the second-floor study. Is this a dream? Drake muttered to himself. North District, suburbs. A quaint, dilapidated two-story house with a garden overgrown with weeds and walls covered with climbing plants. Inside the room, Gawain suddenly saw Leonardo push door in. His cloudy eyes swept over Leonardo Connor, and just as he was about to speak, he heard Leonardo interrupt him, leaving behind a single sentence before the dream shattered. Go find the beyond ingredient for advancing to sequence 7. Leonardo left a note on Gawain's desk. Here's the recipe. Iron Cross Street. Leonardo woke up on the hard bed. Beside him, the setting collection was laid out at some point, and 22 pathways had already appeared on it. Potion formula of sequence 7. This also means that Leonardo is about to be promoted to sequence 7, and the digestion process of student of ratiocination is finally coming to an end. Therefore, he used the ability of Nightmare to make Drake and Gawain continue to play the role, so that he could start teaching acting method when they advanced to sequence 7. As for the other pathways, Beyonders, Leonardo isn't in a hurry, that will require him to spend a lot of time searching for them. Although he is dead, Leonardo believes it is necessary to use dreams to keep others from knowing that he is still alive and to urge them to adopt the acting method. He has now successfully taught only Dunn Smith the acting method, and the results have been remarkable. This has made the weakening less dramatic when he uses the sleepless pathway in the 2081 simulation, and the success rate of the simulation has also improved significantly. In fact, Leonardo had considered including Dr. Dust Gudrian on his mentorship list, but considering Dust's close relationship with Klein, it was likely that Dust already knew about the acting method from Klein. By the time all this was done, it was already evening. The setting sun had turned the sky orange-yellow, casting its light on the street and shining through the narrow window onto Leonardo's face. Next came old Neil's loss of control. Leonardo does not intend to use nightmare, but rather to confront the other party face to face and use psychological suggestion to persuade old Neil to abandon the life-altering ritual. So he left the door again, deciding to move on a day off. He first went to Evil Dragon Bar and, not seeing old Neil, took a horse-drawn carriage directly to old Neil's house. This will be somewhat deceptive, making Leonardo's motives seem less obvious. After taking a horse-drawn carriage directly to the outskirts of the northern district, Leonardo had the driver stop in front of a detached house with a garden. As he walked into the garden, the first thing that caught his eye was the well-planted roses, mint, and other materials. If old Neil weren't mystery prior, but planter, he would probably have been promoted to sequence 7 by now. Leonardo thought to himself as he knocked on the door. Who is it? A hoarse, weathered voice came from inside the room, and the door opened. Old Neil, dressed in a missionary-style hooded robe, with graying hair and deep red eyes, scrutinized Leonardo, who resembled James. Leonardo was still wearing his brand-new police uniform, and he showed old Neil his identification. "Sir, I'm investigating the cause of Mayor Connor's death." Leonardo fabricated another lie, inwardly marveling at how perfect an excuse his own death was. "We need to investigate everyone he has been in contact with." "Oh, okay." Old Neil stepped aside to make room for Leonardo to enter the room. He gestured for Leonardo to sit on the sofa and offered him tea. "What do you want to know?" "Mayor Connor's death is truly heartbreaking." Old Neil drew a full moon on his chest. "May he rest in the kingdom of Goddess." After taking a sip of tea, Leonardo recited the lines he had prepared for Elizabeth. The conversation between the two ended quickly. After all, old Neil and Leonardo Connor did not have much contact. Furthermore, Leonardo is now identified as James, an ordinary person, so old Neil did not mention their past encounter with the out-of-control individuals. Until the very end of the conversation, the instant old Neil turned away, Leonardo's eyes suddenly shone brightly. He didn't speak up directly because it would involve the beyond factor in old Neil's secrets. Right now, he was just an ordinary police officer, and even with the psychological suggestion, Leonardo decided it was best to be cautious. Therefore, he directly influenced old Neil's subconscious. He subconsciously suggested to old Neil that attempting a life-altering ritual was dangerous and would kill many people. He was relieved when he saw old Neil pause for a second, believing that his suggestion had succeeded. His eyes returned to normal, he stood up, tipped his hat to old Neil, and then turned and left old Neil's house. It was already late at night, and Leonardo found a secluded alley nearby to hide in. The number 2081 on his finger turned a dark black. First use, psychological suggestion, and then use, nightmare, for double tapping. After Leonardo left, old Neil slowly walked to his table, which contained various reagents and glass bottles, and stared at the materials on the table. Immediately afterwards, he suddenly slumped onto the table and fell into a deep sleep. In his dream, old Neil saw that his plan would ultimately fail and that he would die at the hands of Klein, Dunn, and Luo Yao. Leonardo manipulated the dream, allowing old Neil to see the final scene of Dunn Smith and Klein's sacrifice. As the dream ended, old Neil lay on the table, a smile playing on his lips, his heavy eyelids slightly narrowed, staring at the reagents on the table, at the syringe from which his blood had been drawn. The blood in the syringe was bright red, seemingly lifeless, like that of a frail old man. Old Neil's weathered face was reflected in the syringe. "Is that so?" He chuckled, his eyes fixed on the syringe, but his right hand had somehow already raised a pistol. "My left hand rests on the table, pressing down on the diary. The latest entry in the diary reads, 'If I can't save her, then I'll stay with her.'" Old Neil pulled the trigger. Bang. 94 The death of old Neil. Bang. In an alley not far from old Neil's house. Leonardo was jolted awake by the gunshot and quickly looked back at old Neil's two-story house. His heart sank, as if he had guessed something bad was going to happen, so he quickly ran forward, taking 3 steps at a time, until he reached old Neil's house. Knock knock knock. The knocking on the door sounded particularly abrupt in the quiet night, but no one answered. Leonardo decided to take a different approach, so he simulated the ability of assassin, altering his body to make his movements more agile and nimble. He climbed over the arched window on the 2nd floor, found the stairs, quickly went downstairs, and came to the living room. Leonardo was stunned when he saw the scene inside the house. At this moment, old Neil lay in a pool of blood, lifeless. His blood was bright red, staining the notebook next to his left hand. Leonardo's gaze swept across the coffee table and landed on the cup of tea he had just drunk. The surface of the tea was no longer steaming, but a thin layer of mist still clung to the cup, carrying the lingering warmth of the remaining liquid. He approached, his steps heavier than ever. Leonardo approached and saw old Neil lying in a pool of blood, smiling, with his eyes closed. He committed suicide. Was it because he foresaw the consequences of losing control, and witnessed the sacrifices of Dunn and Klein, that he chose suicide? Leonardo was filled with astonishment. 2 lines of tears involuntarily streamed down his face. He had thought this would delay old Neil's plan, but it didn't. His suggestion ultimately shattered old Neil's beautiful illusions, causing him to give up hope of living. Old Neil didn't want to hurt anyone, so he decided to end his own life. Leonardo's gaze was solemn. He had returned to his original form, standing under the dim light of a gas lamp, a full moon drawn on his chest, praying for old Neil. The air was thick with the pungent smell of blood, and a deathly stillness pervaded the space. Moonlight streamed in through the window, illuminating old Neil's wrinkled, weathered face. Leonardo noticed that a blood-stained, black and white, sinister eyeball had somehow materialized on old Neil's body. Beyond characteristic, Leonardo immediately remembered Dunn's tradition of consuming the sacrificed members, so he reached out and took old Neil's beyond characteristic. Knock knock knock. Suddenly, a knocking sound rang out on the door. Old Neil, are you home? Dunn Smith's voice rang out from outside the door. Dunn and Klein are here. What a coincidence. A sense of tension immediately overwhelmed Leonardo. So he quickly picked up the materials on old Neil's table and used spirituality fog to perform divination interference. After setting up the spirituality fog, Leonardo changed the color of the 2081 in his hand and simulated old Neil's hoarse voice. Dunn, what are you doing here? Dunn's deep, resonant voice rang out from outside the door. We heard you were sick, so we came to visit you. The room fell silent, no one responded. Outside, Dunn, Klein, and Luo Yao stood before the door. The moonlight in crimson cast long shadows of the three. The night wind blew through the street, swirling up a few withered leaves that rustled on the cobblestones. The three waited anxiously, a deep unease enveloping them like the darkness of night. We can't wait any longer. Dunn muttered something, then raised his right foot and kicked out forcefully. Clang! The locked door was kicked open with a thud. Klein looked around but couldn't find old Neil. Instead, he smelled a pungent odor of blood. Luo Yao was the first to see old Neil lying in a pool of blood. Old Neil! He exclaimed, prompting Klein and Dunn to step forward one after the other. The three stood beside old Neil and saw the single pore on old Neil's forehead. Dunn suddenly felt exhausted. His back hunched slightly, his eyes lowered, and he was filled with deep sorrow. Klein was stunned by the scene before him and stood there dumbfounded. Luo Yao clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, but tears still streamed down his cheeks, dripping onto the ground and seeping into his blood. On the mantelpiece, an old clock still ticked, each chime like a funeral bell tolling for the deceased. The gas lamp flickered in its shade, its light swaying and casting the three shadows of the three men on the wall, their forms indistinct and wavering. The three stood in silence for a long time, as if in mourning. The only sounds in the air were the ticking of the clock and the distant cries of night birds outside the window. After a long silence, Dunn finally spoke. His tone was heavy, each word seeming to be squeezed out with difficulty from the depths of his chest, carrying a hoarse, suppressed sorrow. Klein, you shall perform the divination. In the shadow of a street lamp not far from the house, Leonardo, dressed in a police uniform, looked over the houses and landed on old Neil's house. He kept comforting himself in his heart. Perhaps not losing control is the best outcome for old Neil. He clenched his fists tightly and gritted his teeth as he uttered a name, Ince Zangwil. In the original book, old Neil's loss of control was manipulated by Ince Zangwil, whose goal was to make Dunn Smith's contamination worse. After killing himself, Ince naturally shifted his focus back to his plan. So, in any case, old Neil's ending in Ince Zangwil's story is death. The stories written by 008 don't necessarily need to be completely logical. Sometimes, he uses ambiguous words like coincidence to facilitate the final development of the story. Suppressing his anger, Leonardo took off his police cap, stood in the shadow of a street lamp, and bowed deeply to old Neil. At this moment, he was not James, but had reverted to Leonardo Connor, with blonde hair and blue eyes. As Leonardo straightened up again, he naturally transformed back into James. Located in the suburbs, inside a house with a dilapidated garden. Moonlight streamed gently through the window of crimson, wherein Zhangwil slept peacefully on his bed. The pages of the book on the desk turned on their own without any wind. The quill pen, suspended in midair, began to move on its own. He first scribbled over and modified the story Zhangwil had written. Before attempting the life-altering ritual, Nighthawk's member Old Neil committed suicide unexpectedly for unknown reasons. His Beander characteristic was coincidentally lost and disappeared without a trace. After James successfully assassinated Leonardo Connor, he surprisingly chose to become a police officer in the police department and began investigating the cause of Leonardo Connor's death. This might be some kind of disguise. He found Elizabeth, a former student of Leonardo Connor. We've also found Old Neil, a Nighthawks player who had contact with Leonardo Connor. James deliberately avoided Drake, Gawain, Klein Moretti, Dunn Smith, and others who were familiar with Leonard Connor, fearing being discovered by these people who had worked with Leonard Connor. This might have stemmed from a guilty conscience, but it was a perfect disguise. The night after he visited Old Neil committed suicide, and the Beander characteristic was lost. Perhaps James's true purpose is to steal the Beyond characteristic after Old Neil's death. 95 returned to tarot gathering. Klein finished the divination, shook his head, and indicated that he had not received any useful insights. He saw the spirituality fog, and thus couldn't help but suspect Leonardo Connor's fake death. But judging from his previous reports, he clearly wanted to save Old Neil. Dunn looked up again, noticing the loss of the Beander characteristic, and said to Klein beside him, "Klein, you should go back now and report Old Neil's situation to the Holy See." He then looked at Luo Yao. "Go and fetch Fry. Let's give Old Neil a proper burial. The following morning at 9 a.m., Raphael Cemetery. Leonardo, dressed as James and wearing a brand new police uniform, prayed at Circe's grave and offered a bouquet of white hibiscus. Then, he looked up and saw a group of people from Blackthorn Security Company not far away. Klein leaned on his cane, a neatly folded white handkerchief tucked into his chest. Roseanne, dressed in a long black dress and wearing a small white flower in her hair, stood beside him, sobbing uncontrollably. At this moment, Dunn, Fry, Leonard, and Kenley carried the black coffin containing Old Neil's body, step by step to the front of the tombstone and silently placed it into the dug grave. Leonardo didn't approach, but stood a short distance away, his gaze fixed on Klein and the others. Actually, if he hadn't transmigrated into the body of the mayor of Tingen City, he would still have wanted to join the Blackthorn Security Company and become a Nighthawk. It is very difficult to retain a glimmer of warmth in such a treacherous world. Leonardo restrained himself from offering flowers, instead hiding to the side, his gaze fixed on Circe's tombstone, drawing a full moon on his chest, and reciting a prayer. This was his first visit to see the female worker who had been murdered by Zhangwil through a coincidence because of her. It wasn't until nearly noon, after the members of Blackthorn Security Company had all returned to their posts, that Leonardo dared to step forward, offer a bouquet of deep sleep flowers, and place it in front of the tombstone. "I'm sorry, Mr. Old Neil." He tapped his chest 4 times clockwise. "May Goddess bless you." Leonardo looked up and saw the black and white photo on the tombstone. Old Neil wore his classic black soft hat, his exposed hair was mottled white, and deep wrinkles lined the corners of his eyes and mouth, his dark red eyes slightly cloudy. He was so calm, devoid of sadness, pain, or fear. Below the photo is an epitaph, taken from a recent entry in Old Neil's diary. "If you can't save her, then stay with her. Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Leonardo specifically requested sick leave. During this time, he finally had a legitimate reason to move to a better apartment, a 1-bedroom apartment with a separate bathroom, and the bed was no longer as stiff as before. The room faces the sun and has excellent natural light, which allows Leonardo to wake up to sunlight every morning, instead of waking up to the damp and musty smell every day when he was on Iron Cross Street. He sat at his desk, reverting to his original appearance, waiting for Klein to pull him into above the gray fog, and for tarot gathering to rejoin after a 2-week delay. As for this tarot gathering, Leonardo has also made plans. He intends to purchase the Reader, Pathways Sequence 7 inches Detective, from the members of the Tarot Club. His potion digestion is nearing completion. In Leonardo's view, this may be because he has guessed in Zhangwil's plan time and time again, resulting in accelerated digestion and early promotion. After all, the best reasoning is when a target finds the most reasonable solution through their own reasoning and successfully escapes. Ever since Old Neil's suicide, and Leonardo realized that Zhangwil had orchestrated his death, the feeling of digesting the potion had been drawing ever closer. In reality, the digestive potion doesn't have a real sense of reality, it only knows that it is about to digest or vaguely senses the progress of digestion until the indescribable, complete digestion, arrives. Leonardo could feel that his sequence 8 inches student of ratiocination potion was about to be fully digested. It's time to prepare for promotion to sequence 7. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Justice Audrey's light and cheerful voice soon echoed within the magnificent palace supported by stone pillars. Leonardo's attention was also drawn to above the gray fog by Justice Audrey. Justice Audrey then turned her gaze to the male members in her row and greeted them politely, first, Tower, and then, Little Son, with the hanged man sandwiched in between. Leonardo returned the greeting with a smile. Immediately afterward, Leonardo beat everyone else to the punch by providing a full 6-page Russell's diary for the Fool client. Full, 2 pages are from last week when I was absent, 2 pages are from thanking you for your help last time, and 2 pages are from this week. Leonardo spoke methodically, and the other members of the Tarot Club gasped when they heard that he had collected 6 pages of Russell's diary. Even the Fool client, who was sitting at the head of the table, raised his eyebrows almost imperceptibly. Soon, as expected of Klein, he did not hesitate at all and showed no surprise as he guided Leonardo to materialize the 6 pages of the Russell's diary and hold them in his hand. The others also shared their own findings with the Fool. Justice Audrey turned her gaze to Leonardo across from her, quickly entering spectator mode to observe him. Mr. Tower is quick at collecting Russell's diary entries, providing Mr. Fool with almost 2 pages every week. And if Mr. Fool helps Mr. Tower, he'll even provide 2 extra pages. Audrey immediately thought of herself, speaking of which, they only provided less than 10 pages since joining the Tarot Club. She silently mocked Mr. Tower in her heart. You're putting a lot of pressure on me. However, why was Mr. Tower absent from the tarot gathering last week? What was he doing? Justice Audrey then looked toward the hanged man Alger. Mr. Hanged Man must already know about Qilangos's death, right? I reported it to Mr. Fool at the time, and I suppose it was his bless that made the move. Mr. Hanged Man, what kind of reward do you intend to offer to appease a deity? Audrey's thoughts returned to Leonardo. So, Mr. Tower really does have the ability to predict the future. Just as Justice Audrey was about to observe, Little Son, Derek, he was interrupted by the Fool Klein tapping the table 3 times. The transactions at this gathering have officially begun. 96 seeking to purchase Beyond ingredient from Sequence 7. Leonardo was the first to speak, recalling the potion formula on the setting collection. I need the liver of 6-armed Naga and the ears of Hunter Fox. He paused, then decided to purchase Arbiter as well. Pathway the Beyond ingredient of Sequence 7 inches Interrogator. And the horn of the shimmering black serpent and the dust of the spirit of the lake. As soon as he finished speaking, the hanged man Alger quickly chimed in. Mr. Tower, I will look for it for you. Little Son, Derek also said that he is the same as the hanged man. Justice Audrey, on the other hand, continues to maintain her spectator status. Mr. Tower always requests a lot of Beyond ingredient, and because his demand is so high, usually only 1 or 2 members respond. Hearing the hanged man and Little Son's response, Leonardo smiled and nodded, then said, you can choose the recipe for your own pathway, sequence 4 or below. Upon hearing this, Derek's eyes lit up immediately. He couldn't help but wonder to himself. If I find all the Beyond ingredients that Mr. Tower needs, can I ask him for the recipes for Sequence 8 and Sequence 7? Hopefully, Mr. Tower really does have the recipe for the Sun pathway. Derek suddenly realized that his Bard recipe wasn't provided by Mr. Tower, but by the hanged man. The hanged man Alger shook his head, a rare occurrence, then looked at Leonardo and humbly inquired. Mr. Tower. His tone was very respectful. I hope to receive your next prophecy. Prophecy, Leonardo suddenly fell into thought, wondering what impressive event he could say. Furthermore, this was proposed by the hanged man Alger, and the prophecy he wanted must be related to the ocean. Leonardo believed that he couldn't just make up something out of thin air, it was wrong to try to get something for nothing. He nodded slightly in response and said that he could only do so once the hanged man Alger found the Beyond ingredient for him. Justice Audrey has maintained her status as a spectator. Everyone's used to Mr. Tower having so many potion formulas by now, but I'm also curious about the prophecy, but what can I offer in exchange? Audrey recalled that the only valuable things she had left besides the bounty she had just received from Qilangos were the substitute wand she had previously obtained from her occultism mentor, Leonardo Connor. Audrey suddenly felt a little down. She recalled that after the Tarot Club event last week, her father came into the room and told her the devastating news about her teacher, Leonardo. She had just received her substitute wand from Professor Leonardo when he was assassinated, which made Audrey feel guilty. Although the incident had nothing to do with her, the death of someone close to her inevitably made Audrey's thoughts wander. He silently cherished the memory of Leonardo Connor in his heart. Teacher Leonardo, I will take good care of your cane. Since Alger has already acquired the wind-blessed recipe, and Audrey and Derek are still some time away from promotion, there's nothing left to trade on the Tarot Club for the time being. Klein, who hadn't yet created a smaller version of the world, couldn't very well ask for anything on Tarot Club. He needed to maintain his identity as the Fool. With the transaction concluded, Tarot Club entered a period of free discussion. The hanged man Alger immediately stood up and thanked the Fool Klein for his blessing, which helped him deal with Kilangos. Furthermore, the hanged man stated that he would collect more of Rosal's diary for Mr. Fool, at least 15 pages, and would not ask for any compensation for any additional pages. Leonardo listened with some excitement. Why don't you buy it from me? But considering that he needed to maintain his image like Klein, Leonardo ultimately didn't speak, only muttering to himself. After that, led by Audrey, the members of the Tarot Club chatted about the details of hunting Kilangos. Justice Audrey was very excited and proud. After all, this was the first time the Tarot Club had worked together as a group. The hanged man echoed Justice's sentiments, and the two of them exclaimed at the same time, the tower really does have prophetic abilities. The kingdom of Loan has entered early autumn, and with the death of Kilangos, this fully confirms the tower's original prophecy about the fall of Pirate Admiral. Of course, after marveling at the tower, both Audrey and Alger would praise the Fool. The Fool Klein watched all this with great satisfaction. Even though Kilangos' death had almost nothing to do with him, it was Mr. Azek who was behind it, and the other party was not some blessed member of the Fool. Leonardo was very pleased with this, because his addition made the current members feel a strong sense of belonging to Tarot Club, which is beneficial for future cooperation and unity. As for little son, Derek, although he still couldn't figure out who Kilangos was or what the Pirate Admiral was, he was still infected by the joyful atmosphere and showed a simple smile. Finally, with a series of farewells, Tarot Gathering came to a complete end. Leonardo sat at his desk, lost in thought. After this Tarot Club event, Justice and Hanged Man will both be on leave. After that, Megos will go to Blackthorn Security Company, and Ince Zangwil will finally make his appearance. Leonardo toyed with the Words of Filth talisman made of black iron. Despite having made so many preparations since his transmigration, Leonardo still had some worries. After all, his opponent was 3 sequences higher than him and had already digested the Sequence 5 potion, with 1 foot already in the demigod realm of Sequence 4. However, since Words of Filth killed Rosago in the original book, it means that it can effectively kill Beander in Sequence 5. This is also Leonardo's most effective attack method in recent times. Stop and think carefully about Ince Zangwil's plan. Leonardo stole old Neil's beyond characteristic. I wonder if Ince will send Dunn to come and get it back. Even if I use spirituality fog to interfere, there is still a significant risk of exposure. Leonardo thought to himself, praying that Dunn would forget about it soon. He didn't want to change his identity again. But I still need to make sure I have a new identity to switch with at any time, just in case. Leonardo made his decision. Following old Neil's events, after Mrs. Sharon killed Kenley, Dunn took the Beander characteristic. Unfortunately, I can't directly confront Mrs. Sharon yet. She is the demoness of pleasure of Sequence 6, and I have no chance of winning in a head-on confrontation. Knock knock knock. The knocking on the door interrupted Leonardo's thoughts. He quickly transformed back into James and opened the door. What comes into view is a pair of green eyes. Leonardo quickly recognized the person who came. Leonard. What does he want with me? No, I should say, what does he want with James? Just as Leonardo was wondering what was going on, he saw Leonard show him the inspector's identification. You're James, right? Come with me. 97 Dunn's interrogation. Leonardo followed Leonard with some skepticism. He's now James, a regular police officer, while Leonard is an inspector, his direct superior. Therefore, he could only follow Leonard and be ready to run away at any moment. Leonardo suddenly had an idea and vaguely guessed the truth of the matter. During this time, John Maynard finally met his death, his fate unchanged. And because of this, Mrs. Sharon is probably already being targeted by the Nighthawks. Leonardo, disguised as James, had previously received a potion from Mrs. Sharon and became Beander, the assassin of Sequence 9. This must be why Leonard came to find me, right? While the Nighthawks are relatively lenient towards wild beyonders, as an evil faction in the eyes of the Church of the Evernight Goddess, anyone on the demoness pathway would likely be dealt with cruelly. Thinking of this, Leonardo couldn't help but shudder. I'm in a dangerous situation right now, should I knock Leonard out? No, I can't, I don't know if I can beat the old man inside him. Leonardo quickly devised a countermeasure. Nighthawks probably only know that Mrs. Sharon turned James into Beander, and that the real James is dead. Even if Klein were to perform a divination, he probably wouldn't actually foresee that the current James is Leonardo. James had only recently become Beander. After his failed assassination attempt on Leonardo, now known as James, joined the police force and even dealt with a criminal and rescued Admissal. Besides, Leonard only said he wanted me to go with them, not to go straight to the door and kill me. There should still be room for things to turn around, Leonardo reassured himself. Soon, he followed Leonard to Blackthorn Security Company. Stepping into this familiar place again, Leonardo was overwhelmed with emotions. Initially, he regarded this place as the safest refuge and would seek protection from Blackthorn Security Company whenever he felt like it. If Leonardo were to charge the same rate he would for handling the Beander case, he probably would have already given the house to Dunn as compensation. Leonardo was led by Leonard into the captain's office, where he saw Dunn Smith. Inside the office, Klein waited quietly. After Leonard led Leonard into the office, he turned and left, closing the door behind him. Seeing that Dunn Smith didn't react excessively when he met him, Leonardo felt relieved, which meant that they didn't have Klein use divination to investigate the truth behind old Neil's death. This might have been Ince Zangwill's arrangement. He probably didn't want to wait too long, because his earlier obstruction had forced Ince Zangwill's plans to be postponed. However, Ince Zangwill, who was constantly being hunted by the sanctuary, obviously didn't have much time. So he used 008 to make Dunn Smith abandon the investigation into old Neil's death and instead focus on Mrs. Sharon, who was secretly contaminated by Kenley White's beyond characteristic. Of course, this is just Leonardo's speculation, since Klein, in addition to divination, can also communicate directly with old Neil using spirit medium rituals. If that were the case, old Neil would truly have committed suicide, and no one would suspect anything. Dunn Smith's voice interrupted Leonardo's thoughts, pulling him back to reality. You've had contact with Sharon Hoy, haven't you? Dunn pushed the portrait on the table forward. Leonardo glanced at the portrait briefly and said truthfully, I've seen it before, and Leonardo recounted James's affair with Mrs. Sharon without batting an eye, something he had previously discovered using dream divination. Therefore, Klein must have been able to see it as well. Since his transmigration, Leonardo feels he has seen countless fragments of color in his memories and dreams, which has led to him developing a certain immunity to it, and he no longer blushes when it comes to it as he used to. Dunn nodded almost imperceptibly, signaling Leonardo to say more. But James knew very little about Mrs. Sharon, so Leonardo had to talk about other things. She later gave me a potion formula for Sequence 8, well, I burned it later. Faced with Leonardo's candor, Dunn was somewhat speechless and couldn't find the right words to respond for a moment. After all, none of the people present had mentioned Beander, but James directly exposed himself. This woman warned me to be careful of you, to be careful of the Blackthorn Security Company, Leonardo continued honestly. Dunn raised his head, his gray eyes scrutinizing Leonardo. He didn't think the young man in front of him was a bad person, but Dunn was the captain of the Nighthawks and had a mission to protect Tingen City. He couldn't allow an assassin to roam the society. However, Dunn still decided to use James to lure out Mrs. Sharon, who was behind it all. It's not too late to deal with James after killing Mrs. Sharon. Dunn let out a long sigh. He had been feeling increasingly exhausted lately, seemingly still grieving the loss of old Neil and Mayor Connor. His voice was mellow and deep. Write down all the information you know. Dunn gestured for Klein to fetch paper and a pen, which he then handed to Leonardo. Leonardo took the pen and paper and quickly wrote down various information about Mrs. Sharon, including her appearance, home address, and so on. Dunn took it and glanced at it briefly, since it was common knowledge. He then continued to give instructions. Klein, go find Leonard and have him take charge of the surveillance. Surveillance? Leonardo feigned surprise. Why would you surveillance me? Instead of showing anger, Dunn explained in a rather calm manner. James, we've investigated you. Our initial assessment is that you have no malicious intent, and this may only be temporary. Dunn took a puff of his pipe. You must be under our surveillance, and the smoke swirled in his lungs before he exhaled. After we confirm that you have no malicious intent, we hope that you can become an informant. After all, demons are usually skilled at bewitching people, and we cannot rule out the possibility that you were bewitched into taking the potion. Although Leonardo had expected this, he still nodded as if he understood. He understood Dunn's thinking. If they wanted to capture Mrs. Sharon or the forces behind her, then James, the assassin, would play a certain role. After all, for a long time, Leander James, also known as Leonardo, who was wanted by the 7 major churches for being a member of a cult, was the only one who did not resist. James had only recently become an assassin, making it easy for the Nighthawks to kill him. Dunn spoke again, his eyes cold. If we followed the usual procedures, you would be dead. So you have no right to refuse our Nighthawks surveillance. 98 Kenley White. Leonardo returned home accompanied by Leonard, who did not follow him into the room but instead gave him a meaningful look. Leonard chuckled and said, "Don't worry, our captain won't really kill you. He's just bluffing. You're our friend." Leonard emphasized the word, friends. He then went on to add further explanation. "All Beyonders who have no ill intentions are our friends." Leonardo didn't pay attention to Leonard. After all, he was in a period of arrogance, thinking that he was the protagonist of the story, the chosen one. But Leonardo knew that in a while, not too long, poet classmate, Leonard Mitchell would join the Tarot Club and become a star. In the end, wouldn't he still have to rely on Klein's coattails? Leonardo rolled his eyes inwardly before entering the house. He guessed that Leonard and Sika were probably taking turns monitoring him, since both of them were Midnight Poet in Sequence 8, and even if James from Sequence 9 tried to escape, they could kill him immediately. Considering that James is just a newbie in the Beander world and has little experience in counter-tracking, even if he tries to escape, he can be quickly caught and killed by the Nighthawks. Do I really have to change my identity? Leonardo pondered. His variable curtain could still replace the corpse he had prepared at the beginning. Although it was full of flaws, it could still buy Leonardo some time to escape. Klein and Dunn should be going to arrest Mrs. Sharon tonight. Kenley White will also die tonight, after Dunn ingests the Beander characteristic. How can I stop it? Leonardo decided to ignore the fact that he was being monitored for the time being. It wasn't important, he could always change his identity and start over. The most important thing right now is how to stop Dunn Smith's mental pollution. He pondered for a while, and suddenly had an idea. I have the ability to simulate, faceless, so perhaps I could try simulation. Kenley White, along with Klein and Dunn, went to capture Mrs. Sharon. And Dunn is also a Sequence 6. Even if I don't reveal my true strength, he shouldn't be in any danger of death when facing Mrs. Sharon. Besides, Ince Zangwill will never know that I switched Kenley White long ago. His coincidence won't affect me in the short term, because I am Leonardo Connor. Meanwhile, night gradually fell, and the setting sun was slowly swallowed by the horizon. Leonardo took out the variable curtain, replaced the corpse he had prepared earlier with his own, and made it look like himself. He then placed it on the bed and covered it with a blanket. Fortunately, the body had been properly treated beforehand, so it was stored relatively well and didn't get infested with maggots. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to sleep in this bed anymore. Having made preparations in advance, Leonardo enveloped himself in the variable curtain and vanished from the spot in an instant. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in the outskirts of Tingen City. A putrid stench filled the air, but Leonardo, whose night vision hadn't improved, could barely see his surroundings and felt as if he were in a dilapidated garden. Is this a cemetery? How come these flowers are already withered in September? Leonardo didn't have much doubt. As the sky gradually darkened, he immediately took off running towards Blackthorn Security Company. Klein should have already infiltrated and begun investigating Mrs. Sharon, right? I need to get to Blackthorn Security Company quickly and become Kenley's appearance. Leonardo jogged away from the dilapidated garden. Inside the house behind the garden, a pair of pale fingers lifted the heavy curtains, his gaze peering through the gaps to observe the unexpected visitor outside. Inside Blackthorn Security Company, Klein rushed back and reported his findings to Captain Dunn. Go and call Kenley. The 3 of us can apply for a sealed artifact. Mrs. Sharon probably has more than just Sequence 7. Dunn gave the order with a serious expression. Okay. Without the slightest hesitation, Klein prepared to leave the captain's office. Then, Dunn's voice suddenly rang out, stopping him in his tracks. We use 30217. Klein looked slightly puzzled, but the situation was urgent. He nodded again and then went into the corridor, up the stairs to the reception hall downstairs. Why is the captain's memory getting worse again? While wondering what was going on, Klein suddenly bumped into a body that was neither tall nor strong. He looked up and realized that it was Kenley White, the man he was looking for. Kenley, the captain wants you to come with us on this mission. I'm going to retrieve the sealed artifact. Klein's expression was equally grave. Sealed artifact? Kenley asked, clearly a little flustered. Yes, the captain asked you to prepare the carriage. He will come down and work with us after he has drafted the report. Klein's serious demeanor clearly affected Kenley. Okay, I'll go right away. Kenley quickly turned around, not going upstairs again, and strode towards the Blackthorn Security Company's large door, stepping into the street illuminated by the crimson moonlight. Klein stared at Kenley, feeling a little strange, but he didn't pay it any mind. Instead, he quickly went underground to retrieve the sealed artifact. When he came out, Kenley had already prepared the carriage, and was sitting in the driver's seat, holding the reins tightly and waiting. Has the captain arrived? He's already in the carriage. Kenley gave a brief reply, and Klein, not daring to be negligent in the slightest, nimbly leapt onto the carriage and sat inside. Before setting off, Dunn gave a few words of advice. Once we arrive at our destination, let Klein do a divination before we proceed. I will use Nightmare's abilities to control Mrs. Sharon. Kenley, you will be responsible for using the sealed artifact, 30217. Remember, the opponent is a Beander of sequence 7, or even higher, so we cannot let our guard down. After Dunn finished speaking, he leaned back, still very tired, his tone turning sad. We can't afford to lose another player. Kenley drove the carriage, letting out a slightly nervous sigh. This is the first time I've participated in such a dangerous operation. Klein comforted him from inside the carriage, saying, Don't worry, Mrs. Sharon may have already run away. Klein was equally nervous, and while comforting Kenley, she was also comforting herself. Dunn's gray eyes flickered, and he gave him a helpless look, saying, We'll try our best not to let Mrs. Sharon get away. The three quickly drove the carriage into the deeper night. Meanwhile, inside Blackthorn Security Company, Fry, with his pale face, and Kenley, who was not tall, emerged from the recreation lounge. Strange, where did the captain and Klein go? Kenley is a new member and is quite curious about everything about Beyond. Fry, however, was unsurprised and explained calmly. They must have gone out on a mission. They only have 2 people, while applying for sealed artifact requires 3 people, so it must be quite difficult. Don't worry. Kenley walked to the window and saw the carriages driving away into the night. 99 acting with Klein. 20 minutes later, the 3 Nighthawks arrived at Olsner Street and saw the garden in darkness and Mrs. Sharon's house, lying there quietly as if nothing had happened. Klein removed the pendulum from her left wrist cuff and quickly began to perform a divination. Leonardo, disguised as Kenley, quietly watched Klein perform the divination, secretly praising his own acting skills. Although he used the ability of psychological suggestion to make Klein subconsciously treat him as Kenley. At this moment, Leonardo is holding 30217, the Mirror of Spirit Medium. To be honest, Leonardo felt that the biggest danger tonight was this sealed artifact. Dunn's gray eyes gazed intently at Mrs. Sharon's 2-story hallway, and he gave the clear instructions. We can't approach rashly and alert Mrs. Sharon. I'll try to lure her into her dream from a distance. If that succeeds, the 2 of you go in and subdue her. You can decide for yourselves whether to kill her. If you can't control her, then deal with her. Your own safety is the most important thing. Okay. Leonardo mimicked Kenley's voice, indicating his agreement. Without further ado, Dunn found a corner to lean against, closed his eyes, clenched his hands, and buried his head. His black knee-length trench coat and half-high silk hat seemed to blend into the night. Inside the luxurious and opulent bedroom, Mrs. Sharon lay in her comfortable rocking chair, gazing into the distance. Her cheeks flushed pink, her eyes seemed to well up with tears, and her expression was dreamy yet filled with a strange tenderness. On the table beside her sat the skeletal statue, its thick, snake-like hair appearing softer in the warm light and pink atmosphere. Gradually, Mrs. Sharon looked at the full-length mirror less and less often, her head bobbing up and down, her eyelids drooping uncontrollably. As time ticked by, Leonardo suddenly felt his mind go haywire and saw the enormous crimson moon and Dunn Smith below him. Leonardo immediately realized that Dunn had pulled him and Klein into the dream at the same time, which was a good way to notify teammates when activating the Nightmare ability. Very worth learning. Leonardo nodded to himself, having learned another usage of Nightmare through simulation. Dunn slowly began to speak. Mrs. Sharon has entered the dream state, you may proceed. After saying that, he emphasized another point. Remember, you must be careful enough, not reckless. It's better to miss an opportunity than to take a risk. As soon as he finished speaking, Leonardo's dream shattered, and Dunn, leaning against the corner of the wall with his head down and his fists clenched, reappeared in his vision. He saw Klein look at him, they nodded to each other, and then he quickly disappeared into the shadows, crouching down against the garden fence. He looked at Leonardo across from him, who was gripping the mirror tightly wrapped in a thick black cloth, and walked ahead. Walk. Klein's skill and experience not only impressed Leonardo. The last time the two fought together was when they were helping the owner of Evil Dragon Bar, Wiesen, deal with out-of-control individuals. Klein was visibly nervous at that moment, and Leonardo effortlessly pulled him into his dream and took control of him. It could also be because Klein had been promoted to clown, and had gained some ability to fight directly. Leonardo thought, and began to follow quietly. The two carefully crossed the garden and arrived at the foot of the wall, preparing to climb up to the second-floor balcony along the water pipe. Klein didn't say anything, but took the lead in demonstrating. He maintained an exaggerated balance, lay on the pipe, and scrambled up to the balcony, looking somewhat comical. Leonardo, suppressing a laugh, nodded as if he understood something. Although his own reader pathway has no climbing ability whatsoever, he used the 2081 simulation to develop the sleepless climbing ability, and easily reached the second-floor balcony. He kept holding onto 3027, feeling as if the black cloth wasn't a mirror, but rather a giant door leading to some dangerous and bizarre world. When Klein opened the unlocked balcony door, Leonardo flipped the mirror, tore off the black cloth, and kept the mirror pointing at the floor. Although he wasn't Nighthawks, he had already seen the description of Mirror of Spirit Medium in 3027 on Setting Collection. One of the rules for using the Spirit Medium mirror is to avoid aiming it at yourself or your teammates. The two men drew their revolvers and moved nimbly through the corridor to the bedroom door. Before even entering, Leonardo could smell the intoxicating scent of aphrodisiac. He restrained his body from reacting and watched as Klein reached his left hand toward the door handle. With a silent turn of the knob, the back of the door opened, revealing the warm glow of the gas lamp to Leonardo and Klein. Mrs. Sharon lay naked on the recliner, freely stretching out her alluring body. He wasn't asleep, instead, he leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips, watching the two who had unexpectedly arrived. In the original book, Kenley, in a moment of panic and nervousness about his first dangerous mission, instinctively turned his palm over and showed the mirror of the spirit medium to Mrs. Sharon. However, he was ultimately framed by her, and Kenley himself appeared in the mirror, leading to his sacrifice. So Leonardo didn't flip the mirror, instead, he raised his revolver, drew his gun, and fired. Bang! Bang bang bang! Klein also raised his revolver at the same time, and the two quickly emptied the magazines of Mrs. Sharon on the recliner. Immediately afterwards, Mrs. Sharon's naked body spread out like the moon in the lake. When she reappeared, she was standing next to a full-length mirror, her body outlined inch by inch. The full-length mirror next to her suddenly shattered, leaving shards everywhere. Klein reacted quickly, speaking in a low voice as he swung his arm and tossed out the slumber charm. Klein uttered an ancient Hermes. Crimson. However, the talisman that was meant to be thrown at Mrs. Sharon landed at Klein and Leonardo's feet instead, and Klein's arm, which was waving in the air, was somehow entangled by countless invisible threads. Leonardo reacted quickly, entering meditation to counteract the slumber effect of the spell. Immediately afterwards, the 2081 on his fingertip changed color almost imperceptibly. He murmured, his voice barely audible to those around him. "I'm designating Sharon Hoy's house as my jurisdiction." The moment the words left his mouth, Leonardo felt a warm current slowly flow through his body. His spirituality instantly permeated every corner of Mrs. Sharon's house. At this moment, Leonardo felt that all aspects of his abilities had been greatly enhanced. He is Leonardo Connor. Although he has changed his appearance using Faceless, his Beyonder abilities still follow his true identity. The servants in Mrs. Sharon's household were either workers or came from working-class families. They trusted Leonardo Connor enough. The moment jurisdiction took effect, Leonardo felt the feeling of being pulled into slumber vanish instantly. At the same time, Klein's eyelids drooped, and he abnormally entered slumber, entering a dream. Mrs. Sharon, on the other side, also showed signs of slowing down and pausing. Leonardo knew that the only time he could deal with Mrs. Sharon personally was now. 100 Synergistic Kill. Leonardo opened his mouth and began to recite a poem that brought peace, as if one were in the middle of the night. Whenever the sun sets in the west, dewdrops adorned the hem of dusk. Her bare face was as pale as the moonlight, or like the stars that accompany the moon. Evening primroses, nourished by the night dew. It blossomed with elegant, delicate flowers. Avoid the sunlight like a hermit. Klein fell into a deep sleep, which allowed Leonardo to simulate the midnight poet ability. His voice reached Sharon's heart. She had just escaped slumber charm when she was once again influenced by Leonardo. Leonardo seized the brief opportunity to load his revolver with bullets. Leonardo didn't dare to use the mirror of spirit medium against Mrs. Sharon until she ran out of sunglasses, otherwise he might suffer a backlash. When Leonardo raised his gun again, he suddenly found that his arms seemed to be wrapped in countless thin threads, making it difficult to move and even more difficult to pull the trigger. Leonardo's heart sank as Mrs. Sharon vanished like a ghost. When Mrs. Sharon reappeared, she was holding a dagger burning with black flames, which she was thrusting straight at Leonardo's waist. "Don't want." Klein regained consciousness and shouted loudly. Mrs. Sharon smiled contemptuously. In her view, Leonardo was completely under her control with the thin thread and had no ability to escape. However, just when she thought she was about to succeed, she suddenly saw Leonardo nimbly step back and dodge the attack. Mrs. Sharon quickly turned around, creating distance again, and looked at Leonardo with wary eyes. She didn't know what ability the other party used to break free from the control of her thin threads. So, Mrs. Sharon slowly raised her hand, intending to use the thin threads to control Leonardo and Klein again, but she was surprised to find that she had somehow become inexplicably connected to these threads. "It's broken." Mrs. Sharon immediately recalled the feeling of having her powers stolen when she faced the Nighthawks in order to save Trissa. But these two Nighthawks didn't bring the sealed artifact from that day at all. For a moment, Mrs. Sharon was puzzled, when suddenly she was bound tightly by countless invisible threads, leaving shallow marks on her snow-white skin. She looked up and realized that it was Leonardo, who looked like Kenley, who was manipulating the thin threads. Just now, in the instant Leonardo was controlled by Mrs. Sharon, he used 2081 simulation to recreate the Blood Thief ability and precisely stole Mrs. Sharon's ability to manipulate the fine threads. Klein, do it. Klein couldn't see Leonardo manipulating the threads, he only knew that now was the perfect moment, and Mrs. Sharon seemed to be affected and unable to move. So he raised his revolver and fired several shots in quick succession. Mrs. Sharon's figure once again dispersed like the moon in the lake, and another mirror in the room shattered. There's only one door left, Leonardo thought, pondering a solution. Now we can use the spirit medium mirror to deal with Mrs. Sharon, since her last mirror is placed diagonally across the room, and Leonardo will not be directly facing the spirit medium mirror due to the reflection of the full-length mirror. So, with a slight movement of his fingers, he manipulated the invisible threads, sending them rushing toward Mrs. Sharon again, attempting to use the same trick to bind her once more. However, just as these invisible threads were about to touch Mrs. Sharon, 7 black flames suddenly burst into flames around her, burning the threads to ashes in midair. Immediately afterwards, Mrs. Sharon raised her snow-white arm, like a queen, and pointed to Leonardo's position. The flames shot out like bullets. Leonardo skillfully dodged the attack, but couldn't find a good opportunity to strike in a short time. Klein and Leonardo ran around and rolled around in Mrs. Sharon's room to avoid being attacked by the black flames. As they rolled, they didn't forget to fire at Mrs. Sharon, but the bullets melted the moment they touched the black flames. There's no way I can simulate other Beander abilities in front of Klein. Leonardo suddenly felt somewhat helpless. Although he simulated the abilities of Beander, he was no match for Mrs. Sharon, but she was able to buy him a moment to use the mirror of spirit medium. But now both of them are preoccupied with their own problems, and Klein's tuxedo jacket has even been scorched with holes by the black flames. Just as Leonardo and Klein were at their wits' end, large patches of black mud suddenly appeared on the floor of Mrs. Sharon's room. Immediately afterwards, Leonardo felt a sense of peace wash over him, making him no longer want to fight. He just wanted to lie there, under the moonlight of crimson, and enjoy the tranquility. Mrs. Sharon's movements suddenly stopped, and the 7 black flames swirling around her ceased their agitation and remained suspended in the air. Suddenly, Dunn walked in from outside the door. He stood in the mud, his Adam's apple motionless, and resonated purely with the surrounding air through his own spirituality, producing ethereal, fleeting, and strange sounds. Ah, the threat of fear, Crimson's hope. At least one thing is true, this life is fleeting. One thing is true, the rest are lies. After blooming once, it will depart from this world. Mrs. Sharon was immediately subdued, frozen in place, her will to survive completely surrendered, and she collapsed onto the black mud. Then, the full-length mirror in the opposite corner of the room shattered again. Mrs. Sharon outlined her body in the shadows behind the full-length mirror, and a jet black flame ignited within her, instantly eliminating all negative effects. Leonardo seized the opportunity, took 2 steps forward, and quickly flipped the spirit medium mirror over so that it faced Mrs. Sharon. A figure instantly appeared in the mirror of spirit medium. It was Mrs. Sharon, expressionless, cold, and silent. The beautiful face suddenly became distorted, wrinkles appeared, bloodstains appeared, and rotting patches appeared. No! Mrs. Sharon cried out in anguish, as if witnessing the death of her beloved. Her face quickly turned bluish-green, and yellow pus oozed from the corners of her eyes. Suddenly, Mrs. Sharon burst into a quiet black flame from the inside out, as if she were driving something away. Immediately afterwards, Mrs. Sharon's eyes lost focus again, and she stood there stunned. Dunsmith leaned against the wall behind him and fell asleep. Leonardo and Klein both understood that now was the perfect time to kill Mrs. Sharon. So the 2 of them got up at the same time and loaded their revolvers into magazines at the same time. Klein and Leonardo each extended their right hand, standing at a distance that was neither too close nor too far from Mrs. Sharon, both aiming at Mrs. Sharon's lowered head. Pull the trigger and fire. Leonardo and Klein both emptied the magazines of their revolvers. 14 bullets rang out, 7 of them striking with perfect accuracy, all piercing Mrs. Sharon's forehead. Bang 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 bang. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.